record the Assembly's condolences to those affected by the attacks in Las Vegas and Marseille on 1st of October. Second item, declaration of interest. Can I ask the Assembly to note the recommendations set out at item 2? Can I ask the Assembly to declare any other disclosable pecuniary interest or other relevant interest where they relate to the items on the agenda for today's meeting? Yes, Assembly member. We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was on the advisory. I was on the advisory panel for the Lammy inquiry.
Excellent report. You did well.
Yes, it was.
Thank you. We'll note that. Thank you. Let's go then to item 3. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the minutes of the London Assembly plenary meeting held on 7th September and the Mayor's Question Time meeting held 14th September 2017 as an accurate record?
Agreed.
Thank you. And the Mayor's report. Can I ask the Assembly formally to receive the Mayor's report covering the period from 1st September 2017 to 28th September 2017? Right. And the Mayor is now going to go on and provide an oral update for up to 5 minutes in length on matters occurring since the publication of his report. And can I just say to you, Mayor, and the Assembly members, just raise your voice against any background noise that there is around. There's nothing we can do about that, but all we can do is, if you like, get above it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. No one's ever accused me of being quiet, but I'll try and be loud.
Be loud.
Good morning. Last spring, the government published a devolution deal for London that challenged the London boroughs and I to agree a scheme that would give us greater control of business rates generated in the capital. I'm pleased to announce that alongside the leaders and elected mayors of the 32 London boroughs and the City of London, I've now agreed landmark proposals that will see the capital pilot 100% business rates retention from next April, if agreed by government. We will now have more control to spend more money on the things that matter most to Londoners, including social care, affordable housing, infrastructure investment and support for businesses. Last week, I released new research which reveals that every Londoner in the capital lives in an area exceeding World Health Organization guidelines for the most dangerous toxic particles known as PM2.5. The research also shows that 7.9 million Londoners, nearly 95% of the population, live in areas of London that exceed the guidelines by 50% or more. This research is another damning indictment of the toxic air that all Londoners are forced to breathe every day. I'm doing everything in my powers to significantly reduce emissions. The next step is the introduction of the T-charge on the 23rd of October, which is the precursor to the implementation of the ultra-low emission zone. Only half of the capital's air pollution is caused by on-road vehicles, and London needs more powers so that we can combat pollution from the River Thames, emissions from machinery used on construction sites, and pollution from the domestic burning of solid fuels. This was one of the issues I raised this week when I met the Prime Minister. This week we released new figures that show how London's centre of gravity is moving east. East London is now the fastest growing area of the capital, with 110,000 additional jobs since the 2012 Olympic Games. The number of jobs created in the 6 Olympic host boroughs is more than 3 times the forecast pace of growth in 2013. According to a report by Oxford Economics, this boom is expected to continue with an additional 125,000 jobs across 6 boroughs by 2030. The lion's share of these are predicted to be in science and technology. I've also set out plans on how to create a new world-class cultural destination in the Olympic Park. I'm determined to bring together some of the world's best arts and education institutions to make it one of the largest cultural and educational destinations in Europe. Chair, I've also been asked to give an oral update from Assembly Keith Prince on TfL discussions with ASLEF at ACAS. I'm pleased to say that the proposed London Underground strike intended for last Thursday was suspended. This was only possible because of the vastly improved relationship between TfL and their staff representatives since I became Mayor, which enabled constructive talks about the dispute. TfL reassured representatives of their staff that it will continue to meet the commitments previously agreed as part of the 2015 pay deal. Discussions on exactly how these will be implemented can now continue without disruption. These commitments were made as part of the 2015 pay deal. There is unlikely to be a significant cost implication of the implementation, although, as I said, the precise details are still under discussion. By TfL holding constructive talks with trade unions and acting on their concerns, this strike has been suspended and there has been a clear improvement on the atrocious industrial relations legacy I inherited. This has seen the number of days lost to strike on the Underground reduce by around 60% since I became Mayor. That's 60% less disruption and frustration for commuters and businesses under me than the previous Mayor. After last week's strikes on Southern Rail, Merseyrail, Arriva Rail North and Greater Anglia, I believe that the government and private rail companies should follow my lead and improve the way they engage with unions to prevent an autumn of discontent for rail passengers.
That's it? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for that. We've now got 20 minutes for follow-up questions for all of the issues raised by the Mayor, except the tea charge, because there is a question on the order papers on that in the name of Assemblymember Pigeon. So we'll get... Oh, sorry, Assemblymember Russell. So we'll get to that as we meet it on the order paper. Assemblymember Prince.
Thank you. Morning, Mr. Mayor.
Good morning.
And thank you very much for actually arranging a date for the meeting regarding tube noise. I appreciate that. It's very kind. Could you, Mr. Mayor, just guarantee this Assembly that in this dispute that you kindly gave us an update on, that no driver will be offered a 4-day week unless they also accept a proportionate pay cut?
Well, what I'm not going to do, Chair, is give a running commentary on the discussions between TfL and the trade unions. I'm pleased that there were constructive talks and the strike that was planned for last Thursday has been suspended. I've set out there's no plans for there to be a significant increase, but clearly it's contingent upon the discussions that take place. But the deal we're talking about, of course, is the deal done in 2015 before I became Mayor. I'm not sure if you're an Assembly member what your views were on that deal, but I'm sure if there are questions about that deal, the Foreign Secretary can answer them.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Follow-up questions to the Mayor's update? Oh, lovely. Let's then move on. And we're going to go on to questions to the Mayor as set out on the priority order paper. So the first question is in the name of Assemblymember Twycross, the cost of Brexit.
Thank you, Chair. Businesses across London and the rest of UK rely on supply chains that stretch through Europe and around the world. A strong pound combined with unfettered access to goods and services across Europe have been instrumental in driving down costs for consumers in recent years. Since the referendum, however, the fall in the value of the pound has increased costs for many businesses who have subsequently passed these costs on to customers by raising prices or reducing the size of their products while keeping prices the same. The continued drop in the value of the pound since the referendum has contributed to inflation rising from 0.5% to 2.9%, far above the Bank of England's target of 2%. The UK now ranks top for inflation rates among the G7. There is no published data yet to establish a London-specific picture, but this inflation will inevitably be having an impact on the cost of living in the capital, with goods such as food and fuel increasing in cost. This impacts most severely on the most disadvantaged Londoners. And I'm concerned that wages are not rising fast enough to offset this inflation. If UK businesses face new barriers to trade with the EU, this is only likely to further increase costs and prices, which is why I'm advocating for the UK to remain a member of the single market. I'm doing what I can to help ease the burden on Londoners. I'm making public transport more affordable through my Hopper Fare and TfL fares freeze, which will help Londoners access jobs, education and training. I'm embarking on a programme of delivering genuine affordable homes for Londoners, and I'm encouraging businesses to pay people a fair wage for a day's work by signing up to the London Living Wage. Tackling low pay and workplace inequality is one of my top priorities, and through my Good Work Standard, I will ensure that employers are supported to share and adopt best practice in employment standards. My Deputy Mayor, Joanne McCartney, has been working with the Living Wage Commission to ensure the analysis which determines the new London living wage rate to be announced next month, reflects the increase in the cost of living that Londoners may now face?
Thank you. In July, Labour members launched a survey asking Londoners their views about Brexit and how the negotiations were going, and it painted a picture of people really not knowing what the government was aiming at. There's widespread confusion over what the actual asks are for the government. And one of the things that came out quite strongly was exactly this point around the prices. And the report's going to be published quite shortly, but I want to take the opportunity to highlight that 90% of respondents felt that prices had increased since the EU referendum. And when weighted to the population in London, this equated to over 3/4 of Londoners. So people are really starting to feel the Brexit squeeze, and I recognise the work you've been doing in this area to sort of push this agenda. And actually 71% of respondents also felt that wages had stagnated during the same period. So this is all part of a picture in a city where cost of living is already a major issue. How confident are you with some of the points you raise around food prices rising and the cost of living? How confident are you that the government is able to set aside party interests to put the interests of the population? Obviously, in our case, we're particularly keen to push the interests of London. But I think that people are genuinely confused about where the government is heading, and it just feels like in the midst of party arguments, the interests of the population are being lost.
I'm extremely worried about the course of Brexit negotiations. There'll be a statement today from Michael Barnier and David Davis. I've been quite clear in the regular meetings I have with David Davis the concerns of Londoners. The most recent meeting I took with me Alice Gast, the president of Imperial. Previously I've taken John Sorrell, who's involved in the creative industries sector. I'm increasingly worried that for political reasons the deal that we're doing with the EU won't bear fruit that we need. I accept, by the way, we're leaving the European Union. I've got a view in relation to the timing of the Article 50 notice and the progress of discussions. But the government's got to recognise the uncertainties do nobody any good, but the plummeting pound is causing real problems in relation to the price of goods you referred to. Anybody who could afford to go on holiday overseas will have seen the consequence of the weak pound. Prices are going up, wages are not going up. Even if the pay cap is lifted, it's still below inflation, so it's a real terms pay cut, and you'll be aware from the research done by TUC and others, because of the pay cap over previous years, if you compare and contrast the wage of most people in London, public servants in particular, 2010 versus now, their wages have gone down.
Okay, thank you.
No follow-up questions? Thank you. Well, let's go to the next question then. Assembly Member Boff, refusing to relicense Uber.
Thank you. The decision not to relicense Uber was made by Transport for London in line with its responsibilities as the licensing and regulatory authority for taxi and private hire services in London. I fully support TfL's decision, and I welcome the London Assembly's unanimous motion supportive of TfL's decision. I was informed by the decision shortly before it was announced by TfL on the 22nd of September. As the Mayor of London, I welcome innovative new companies that help Londoners by providing a better and more affordable service. But providing an innovative service is not an excuse for not following the rules. Regulation is therefore a reason. I've been clear that all companies in London must play by the rules and adhere to the high standards Londoners expect.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You quoted that saying that you don't think that it was improper for politicians to interfere with a quasi-judicial manner. Is that correct?
Yep.
TfL issued a press release on the, I think it was the 28th of September, which stated that that because of your request, there would be a further meeting with Uber. Is that correct?
Because of the approach made by the global CEO of Uber after his apology to discuss with TfL how we could address the concerns, I asked the TfL Commissioner to make himself available to the global CEO to discuss how they could address the concerns TfL had raised.
So you considered it proper to interfere at one point, but improper to interfere at another point?
I don't think having discussions with the global CEOs apologised is an improper use of the Commissioner's time, and I asked the Commissioner to make himself available. I'm pleased that he did, and I welcome the apology from the global CEO of Uber, which shows the reason why TfL made their decision.
And as a result of that meeting, is the application by Uber now being reconsidered?
No, let me explain the procedure. You may not be aware. So when TfL reaches a decision on a licence and rejects an application for a licence, the applicant can appeal. And so Uber can appeal, I think it's 21 days. And I presume Uber will be appealing, and I suspect the legal appeal will take its course.
So during that 21-day period, you did intervene?
No, let me explain how it works. So the courts now will consider the appeal from Uber, and of course TfL will defend the decision they made on the 22nd of September.
Are you surprised that over 850,000 people have signed the petition that supports Uber being granted a new licence?
Uber is a very popular product used in London. Uber's PR department tells me 3.5 million Londoners use it. So of course I'm not surprised that Londoners are unhappy with Uber not playing by the rules.
In what way did Uber not play by the rules?
Well, the TfL decision on the 22nd of September set out their concerns that Uber weren't a fit and proper private hire vehicle operator. There were 4 reasons given in the TfL decision which led them to conclude that they were worried about the safety and security of Londoners. And I'm happy for TfL to send you a copy of their announcement on the 22nd of September.
How soon can Londoners expect a U-turn on this decision?
Well, I think the global CEO has already done a U-turn. I think Londoners should welcome the U-turn from the global CEO of Uber. Londoners will be aware, so the Assembly certainly will, of the approach of London Uber and UK Uber in the past, and of the global CEO in the past. And I think we should welcome this U-turn from the global CEO. And that's one of the reasons why I asked the TfL Commissioner to make himself available for discussions.
What was that U-turn, Mr. Mayor?
It was the apology given by the global CEO of Uber to Londoners. And again, I can arrange for his apology to be sent to you if you've not seen it.
Yes.
But that was a U-turn.
I don't think anybody's seen it. There was an apology, a global apology, and you're saying there was a subsequent apology.
Well, Chair, I can only apologise if anyone was not aware of the apology given by the global CEO to Londoners. It was in the well-read newspaper, the Evening Standard, which had a page setting out the apology to Londoners. But I can arrange for that back copy of the Standard to be sent to Senator Boff. I appreciate Conservative Party doesn't like the Standard now, but we'll send it to you.
I'm very grateful for the sarcasm. You're saying that apology was the basis of your U-turn?
No, I said that was the U-turn from Uber. I think you're either intentionally or unintentionally misquoting me. There was no U-turn from TfL, no U-turn from me. There was a U-turn from Uber, and I welcome this U-turn. And you clearly haven't seen it, which is why you mentioned you're not known about it. So I will send you the apology from the global CEO to Londoners, and then you can see the U-turn from them.
I thought we might be referring to a different one, because what particularly did the CEO of Uber apologise for?
Well, I'll arrange for that to be sent to you, because you clearly haven't seen that. And
you obviously have read it. You've told me you have. So what was it?
He was apologising to Londoners for mistakes made by Uber in the past.
Which mistakes were they?
Well, I don't want to put words in the Uber CEO's mouth, but I'll send you the words.
Well, those words weren't in the news report.
I'm afraid they were, and I'm sorry you weren't around.
The specific reasons for the apology were not in the news report, and they were bundled together with certain apologies about the management of staff and certain approaches on a different basis. There were no specific apologies on any specific item raised by TfL when it rejected the application just before you were accepted to speak at the Labour Party conference.
I'm very happy to send you the apology from the global CEO, which will hopefully miscorrect the misunderstanding you're under.
Did you enjoy your speech at the Labour Party conference, Mayor?
I did, thank you.
Yeah. And was the
Excuse me, Mr. Boff, where does the Labour Party conference and Uber meet?
well, 1 second and you'll find out. Was threatening the incomes and livelihoods of 40,000 people worth getting your speech at the Labour Party conference for?
Ridiculous question. Let's have another one. No, I want the member, excuse me, Mr. Devenish, I want the member to put a question regarding the item that he has on the order paper. Thank you.
Was the threatening of the livelihoods of the 40,000 Uber drivers worthwhile in terms of getting your speech at the Labour Party conference? Was it okay?
No, it was not. That is not an appropriate question. I will not have an answer from you on that. Do you wish to have another question, or shall I move on, Assembly Boff?
If I'm not going to be allowed by the chair to ask my questions, I think I'd better stop.
Thank you. Let's then call Assembly Member Devenish on the matter on the order paper.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Mayor, good morning. Do you accept that when politicians of any party make a decision that actually hurts real people, that's when the public really take a dim view of all of us?
Well, that's the reason why Jeremy Corbyn raised universal credit yesterday at PMQs. It's an outrage. It's an outrage how people are suffering because of decisions made by politicians. And so, of course, I think politicians should stand by their decisions.
Mr. Mayor, my comments to the Assembly, can I put them to you? We want to hear what you have to say, what you have done.
Well, Chair, with respect.
Yeah, no, I just want you to say that so that we can move on for the day.
No, Chair,
otherwise, we will just end up in a really bad place.
Sure, Chair.
No, it's not. I'm going to say to him, can I have an answer to the question regarding your perspective, your views? If you have none, we can move on to another question. You have
nothing
none?
to say about 40,000 people having their careers damaged.
Can I just say this
lowest paid Londoners who can't actually possibly pay for food on their kids'
Wait a minute,
tables.
he hasn't got a question yet. What's the question?
The question is, when we make decisions, do we look at the effects to real people?
Can I just say, Chairman, I welcome the Conservative Party finally taking interest in the low pay and conditions of the lowest workers in London.
Thank you. Do you have another question, Assembly Member Devenish? Do you?
I
No?
can't. Really, this is a farce, frankly.
Okay. Thank you. Let's move on then to the next question on the... Assembly Member Duval.
Mr Mayor, do you not recall, I think Assembly Member Devenish during the summer, Keith Prince, Assembly Member Keith Prince, in the summer asking you not to licence Uber and making representations to you on the very point that TfL have intervened and brought Uber to account?
Well, can I just say this, Senator Duval? One of the reasons why the public are sick to death of cynical politicians is the behaviour of these guys this morning. At the previous Mayor's question time, that side accused me of being too cosy to Uber because of the chair of the Nighttime Commission, who's a QC, did a case for a driver. The Assembly has passed a unanimous motion welcoming TfL's decision, but because these guys think it's a cheap hit to criticise me for alleged bias being too cosy to black cab drivers, then are criticising me for supporting TfL. During my administration, I want TfL to be empowered to operate in a quasi-judicial manner when it's appropriate to do so. And I support TfL's decision, and I welcome the approach taken by the global CEO of Uber. And to suggest from the Assembly member that somehow TfL's done a U-turn when you've seen a change of stance, which I welcome, from the global CEO of Uber, just beggars belief.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Bacon.
Very much, Chair. Just for factual reasons, Mr Mayor, because you've pointed collectively at us twice now, how many Conservative members voted in this unanimous motion that you were talking about? How many were in the room? And how many people put questions to you about Uber? The reason for the question is very simple, Chair, because clearly the party opposite don't get it. is that the Mayor is attempting to smear all of the Conservative members and tar us all with the same brush. So the question stands, how many members in each case are you talking about?
Well, can I just say, Chair, what I saw was the Assembly statement, which was from the London Assembly, with a quote from the Chair of the Assembly. And not unreasonably, this refers to motions and whether they're passed unanimously or by majority. Now, it's not for me if some Tory members don't turn up or
Chair,
have a toilet
Chair,
break.
the Mayor doesn't know
What
the
I do
answer
know
quite clearly.
is the... If I could answer the question, Chair.
What I do know
is the record will show the motion was passed unanimously.
Yes, and the answer, for the avoidance of doubt, Chair, because the Mayor clearly doesn't know the answer, is 1. In each case, the answer is 1. Well, there are 8 Conservative members, Mr. Chair.
Okay,
so trying to say,
Assembly Member Bacon.
attempting to say that all Assembly members have done one thing on one hand and one thing on another is completely...
Chair, I think there's a separate issue about value for money for the taxpayer. If only one turns up.
Well, your record for turning up, Mr. Mayor, isn't brilliant, so I really wouldn't start throwing stones in that way.
Right, now, okay, I mean...
One out of 8 turned up, really? Crikey.
No, we were having a coffee break.
I would just like a little survey of the students in this room to see, are they really being informed or entertained?
Well,
I would say this, Chair. I hope more than 1 out of 8 of you turns up to your lectures.
Are you being entertained or are you being informed? Neither.
If they want to be informed by these answers, they've come to the wrong place.
Okay, so we are going to start again in the next question. We're going to go for the high ground. The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Berry. New housing policies.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for your question. For many years, we have failed to deliver anywhere near enough new homes in London. We have particularly been failing to build enough new affordable homes. There is a gulf between what London is building and what Londoners need. 80% of the new homes built in London are now affordable to just 8% of Londoners. My long-term aim is that half of new homes built should be affordable. We know that moving forward towards this target will take time, considering that when I took office, just 13% of the pipeline of new homes were affordable. And when I say affordable, unlike my predecessor, I don't believe that 80% of market rates is genuinely affordable for most Londoners. So to raise the level of affordable housing, the strategy outlines measures in 3 key areas. First, it sets out that I will use the London Plan to strengthen the planning guidance I've already published to ensure developers contribute their fair share of affordable homes. The guidance supports schemes where at least 35% of homes are affordable before any public subsidy is taken into account by fast-tracking them through the planning system. Those that fail to meet the requirement will have their viability assessments made public and interrogated by my team of viability experts. Second, the draft housing strategy sets out how I want to increase the level of investment in affordable homes. With more funding, we could do more to help Londoners with the lowest income. And third, my draft strategy prioritises the delivery of affordable homes on publicly owned land, including land owned by mayoral organisations. The strategy includes a target for 50% of homes developed on GLA land being affordable. My strategy also has many other policies, including a series of measures to protect London's existing affordable homes and calling on the government to reform the way that Right to Buy operates to ensure homes are replaced on a like-for-like basis. The strategy also explains that where estate regeneration schemes entail the demolition of affordable homes, I will use my planning and investment powers to ensure these are replaced on a like-for-like basis. This has not been a planning requirement of either previous mayors and not a requirement of government either, so it provides a genuinely new protection for affordable housing, particularly social rented housing. I'm also working on the first ever London Good Practice Guide to Estate Regeneration.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. In my supplementary questions, I want to talk about the definition of affordable in terms of intermediate rent in the draft housing strategy. And just to be very clear, I'm not here to have a go at you about this. These are going to be very constructive questions, Mr. Mayor. I think the problem is that London has a problem. I know, you just said so again, you hate the 80% of market rates definition as much as I do, and I suspect I'd be having similar problems as you if I was mayor dealing with this. I think the problem's pretty clear. You've put into your strategy in section 4.1b a bullet point that covers London living rent homes, and that's a very good definition of affordable in terms of wages. But there's also a bullet there that says a range of other types of intermediate rented homes, and it references a £60,000 income. And then in the glossary, we've got the definition of affordable rent, which is the definition from the government, from the MPPF, which says not more than 80% of the local market rent. So your housing strategy is not a new planning policy yet, but my worry is if that definition makes it through into the London plan, we'll have a loophole, developers will use it, and outside your funding streams, that's what we'll mainly see in private developments. So I want to be constructive and see what we can do about this. Is this 80% of market definition of affordable rent in the housing strategy at the government's insistence, or just based on what's in the MPPF? Have you actually discussed it with them and tried to change it?
So firstly, the draft housing strategy is a draft housing strategy, so please do respond to the consultation, and we're encouraging everyone to respond to the consultation. It's a meaningful consultation. Secondly, I think the government deserves credit for not being insistent on all the affordable homes being 8% market value or starter homes. If you remember, the conversation we were having during the mayoral election was the government saying a starter home of £450,000 was affordable and rent 8% market value. To give the previous House Minister, Gavin Barwell, credit, he was flexible in definition. The three definitions we got through in relation to the deal we made was one where it's a London living rent, a third of average earnings, and that by definition will change in different parts of London. Secondly, shared ownership, and there's I know concerns around how much the income should be for shared ownership. And third, a social rent, which is the formula based on manual workers. So the flexibility is there, but the spectrum we're given is what's affordable across London.
Yeah, I mean, if I can clarify, though, that what you're talking about there is the funding deal that you did with government. The Tory conference announcement about new housing funds, which I think you also talked to the government about this week, they do seem to be suggesting that even they're losing faith in market rates as a measure of affordability. Their policy was specifically to put more social homes into areas with very high market rents. Do you think, in terms of changing the planning policies, that maybe gives us an opening? What I'm sort of really asking is what we can do as an assembly, what Londoners can do to try and help you campaign to get this definition changed. I think it's really, the implications are really serious. If you've got £60,000 a year, you still can't afford a family home, even with that kind of salary.
To rent or buy?
To rent.
So in the rental market, we're doing a number of things to try and stabilise the increases in the rental market in London.
I'm talking about planning policies, though, only. I mean, is this something...
But planning can reduce the rent. So the idea is if we reduce the value of land by the viability team, if we use the revolving fund to help assemble land, that'll hopefully bring down the land. The other thing some innovative councils are doing, like Islington, are using planning briefs to try and deflate the value of land going through the roof.
I'm really out of time, I'm really sorry. This has actually started to be quite a good discussion. I'm waiting for a date for a meeting with you since the June Mayor's Question time when we talked about estates. I wonder if I can get that date soon and we can discuss this more.
We'll sort that. I'll chase it up, Chair.
Any follow-up to that? No. Okay. Next question is Assembly Member Curtin, London's population growth.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure where the 12 million figure came from. I consider that an increase in London's population to around 11.2 million in 33 years' time by 2050. The central prediction of the GLA intelligence team is sustainable if properly planned for. Across the world, the population of cities are rising. Currently, 54% of the world's population lives in cities. By 2050, that will be 66% of the world's population. Growth per se is not a bad thing. The most important thing is that we properly plan for such growth. This is what I'm doing through my draft strategies, including the London Plan. The London Plan will ensure that we make best use of land through intensification, encouraging a mix of land uses, and through co-locating different uses. My plan sets out how we can do this while also ensuring the protection of our prized green belt and other green and open spaces. Transport's got a vital role to play in delivering good growth, and that's why I've been ambitious by ensuring that by 2041, 4 in 5 journeys in London are conducted on foot, by cycle or using public transport. We also need to fix our broken housing market, as I've just said, and my draft London housing strategy sets out plans how we can do this. I've also got plans in my draft environment strategy about sustainable buildings and ensuring that future buildings are zero carbon homes, as well as ensuring that we can have all non-residential development to be zero carbon from 2019. And finally, Chair, my draft economic development strategy sets out our ambitions for maximising opportunity for all, including access to education and skills, fairer pay and work practices.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There does seem to be a slight discrepancy between the data that you have given from the London Data Bank and the Office for National Statistics that puts the figure about 500,000 higher. But it's still going to be a large population increase. And one of the things I've asked you about before is water. And in an answer to a question, you did say that Thames Water, which provides water to 70% of London's population, does forecast a deficit of 100 million litres per day by 2020, rising to a deficit of 400 million litres per day by 2040. Now, in various committees, we've talked about possible plans to build a reservoir in Oxfordshire. I don't know if that's something that's just an aspiration or something that's actually going to take place. Have you got any more information about how we're going to prevent London from having a water deficit in the future?
Can I say, the issue you raise about water shortages is one that's at the fore of the minds of many mayors around the world, us included. Thames do have plans to build a reservoir in Oxford. They have plans, not an aspiration. They're also taking steps to address the issue of leakages. You'll be aware of the issue we have of leakages across London. The reality is many of the pipes, the Victorian pipes, not being maintained properly. So in addition to improving the maintenance of the pipes, they have got plans for the reservoir that you talked about. I'm happy to send you the details of the plans, and Thames Water are in advanced stages in relation to that.
Okay, thank you. Now, something else I've asked you about, which I know that you have concerns about as well, is the type of energy which comes to London through the national grid. And I've mentioned it, the national grid is closing coal power stations and replacing them with burning wood. And that means that we are chopping down forests in North and South America, turning them into wood pellets, shipping them across the Atlantic and burning them in power stations like Drax and others to provide electricity through the national grid, which we'll need more of because you want to turn the city into electric-only, eventually, sort of electric-only cars, and you've got plans for 300 charging points. I know you said in an answer the increased demand for biomass and its use in this highly energy-inefficient way concerns me. It can only add to the pressure on the existing resource and supply chains and has the potential to encourage unscrupulous biomass trading, resulting in further deforestation. This is where London's going to get some of our energy from. What have you done through the C4 Cities Network and other contacts you have to counter this use of biomass in our biggest power stations and to prevent deforestation in North and South America?
Okay, so Chair, I don't accept a number of the premises made in the question. Yeah. So I don't want my answer to assume that I accept some of the premises made. But recently we published the draft environmental strategy, which brought together 6 different strategies into one. Separately, in relation to C40, you asked a question. I'm one of the vice chairs of C40, and they're looking at a whole host of issues, including sustainable energies, and how we can learn from each other. I'm not sure if it's fair to say, though, that we're increasing reliance on wood burn in fire stations, power stations. Well, in fact, it's the other way. Well, in fact, we as a country are going far more towards renewable, and I welcome this. My criticism is not going fast enough, but it's just not accurate to say that we're going backwards. And actually, living in cities, your question was about cities and population, is more environmentally friendly. Actually, denser populations living in cities is better for the environment. They've been spread out in rural parts of the country.
Well, sustainability, because with an increase in population, we'll need more energy. But I'll move on. But to ask you another thing, I mean, one of the things that you will need to do is increase the capacity of the rail network and the underground network, etc. But there's recently been problems with the Northern and Jubilee line. The trains which were going to be ordered are not going to come on time. And we hear from TfL that Crossrail 2 might be delayed by 10 years. Is that going to have an effect on the ability of Londoners to move around if there's such a huge population growth? And what are you going to do about those two issues?
So our current population is 8.8 million. And you talked about different figures, 2050. We can go even sooner than that. 8.8 now. 9 million in 2020, 10 million in 2030. And that's one of the reasons why the draft strategy set out a plan to get more people walking, more people cycling, more people using public transport. And one of the things we're doing is increasing public transport capacity. That's why, for example, the Elizabeth line opening next year and the year after, part of it opens December 2018, part of it 2019, will increase public transport capacity by more than 10%. It goes to the east and to the west, 40 new stations from east to west will increase transport capacity. Will Norman, the Walking and Cycling Commissioner, is encouraging more people to walk and cycle. The reason why the Jubilee and Northern Line timelines for the trains was because the trains we have increased efficiency. We've improved signalling. We've got Northern Line extension to South London in Battersea. We've got the Elizabeth line starts in 2018. So that means the need for the Jubilee line additional trains is less because people will divert from Jubilee line to Elizabeth line. But we should welcome the engineering advances made, the advances made elsewhere, which means rather than having to buy a train on a certain day, we can delay the need to buy the train until a future day, which saves us money. You wouldn't buy a new car when your current car is working really well. Why should we spend money on a new train when the current trains, because of increased engineering, are working well?
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Assembly Member Arnold. Her question relates to modern-day slavery.
Thank you for this timely question, Chair Arnold. You'll know that I've seen the recent Evening Standard campaign on modern slavery. Modern slavery and the trafficking of people are truly appalling crimes. The Met has a central role in tackling modern slavery. In part, this is through its work nationally and internationally to tackle the organised criminal networks at the heart of trafficking and slavery. But equally, the Met has a key role in providing support for victims. They have one of the only dedicated modern slavery and kidnap units in the country, which deals with all referrals of modern slavery through the National Referral Mechanism. This unit works closely with the voluntary and community sector to identify the appropriate support for victims. As of August 2017, there have been 59 arrests made under modern slavery charges, and there were 88 arrests in total in 2016. Unfortunately, ascertaining prosecution numbers for modern slavery cases is complex. Offences can fall under a number of acts, even beyond the Modern Slavery Act, so it would be misleading to give a figure. What I can say is that since the Act came into force, we're aware of at least 6 cases in London resulting in convictions which have used the new legislation. So although it's still embedding, the Act does provide useful additional tools for enforcement. The Met are actively working to increase convictions. However, we need to be upfront that this is not something to be dealt with by the Met alone. In my police and crime plan, I've made a commitment to bring partners together to look at how we work collectively, sharing intelligence and best practice, and pooling resources to target our response. Via the London Modern Slavery Partnership Board, we are already building awareness of frontline professionals to identify victims, working with industries to make supply chains more transparent, and looking at how we target enforcement to pursue abuse that takes place on a smaller scale.
Thank you for that. I've got a couple of questions. Because of the need to raise awareness and share as much information as possible, will you look to ensuring that the work of the board and the work of all the meetings that you're having, the deputies having around this issue is publicised as soon as possible? I'm sure we can find a mechanism of doing that.
Yes,
yes, so that's great. Now, I welcome the commitment in the draft police and crime plan to establish the dedicated slavery single point of contact officer in each borough. Being realistic and where borough funds are, would you agree with me, if that post isn't funded by MOPAC, then what we would then have is really 1 or 2 boroughs maybe having this person, and that would be totally unacceptable given the seriousness of the situation.
I agree with you, and just to reassure you, Chair, we're currently identifying a modern slavery ambassador for every borough, and these officers will get additional awareness training so they can respond to questions and concerns by colleagues at borough level. But you're right, there's no point, those boroughs that can afford it having it and those that can't not having it. So you're right to raise the issue of resources and the link with the quality of service we provide.
And the other point, having spoken to the women who have escaped and who have had to, if you like, launch their own campaign, and they've received support, and I acknowledge the support from the editor of the Evening Standard, yourself and others. Will you keep up the pressure on MOPAC and all bodies that you meet, including the Home Office, to just, say to them that women enslaved is as important as the time and energy we spend regarding smuggling guns and drugs. The smuggling and trafficking of humans has got to be the top priority. Would you agree with me, and will you continue to take that work forward?
I couldn't agree more. And just to reassure you, Chair, one of the reasons why the Modern Slavery Partnership Board was set up was because of the lack of coordination taking place. And you'll be aware that in addition to the, inverted commas, police partners on there, there's also very important partners from the community as well. And it's crucial we provide more information, but also we don't allow this to fall down the list of priorities.
Well, the women involved are relaunching their organisation. I'll make sure you get an invite.
That's very kind, thank you.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Bob.
Mr Mayor, this is the first I've heard of the ambassadors for human trafficking. Could you just tell me where they're going to be coming from? Who's going to be appointed? Is it going to be a police officer? Is it going to be somebody from the local authority?
Sure, thank you. Yes, it will be a police officer. And it's really important to cascade the training down to other colleagues in a borough level, because if you approach a police officer, neighbourhood police officer, he or she may not have the expertise, but if there's an ambassador within the borough, they can make sure there's that skill set passed down.
Okay, thank you very much.
Back to me. Okay, thank you for that. Next question is from Assembly Member Steve O'Connell, Borough Mergers and Response Times.
Can I thank you for this question? I know this is something that the Police and Crime Committee have been looking into, and I understand the concerns, genuine concerns that you and the committee have. I've been clear with the Commissioner that response times fell to an unacceptable level in the 2 basic command unit pathfinders and urgently needed to improve. The Met has responded by making additional short-term resource available to response teams and adapting the BCU response model in each pathfinder. These changes have had an impact, and performance has improved over the last couple of months. The Met has given assurance that it has learned important lessons in how it manages response within the BCU model, and response times are now moving back towards comparable levels with other areas of London. My Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime is continuing to monitor all areas of performance across the pathfinders. It's important to be clear about the context that surrounds the Met pathfinders. The government has reduced police funding, putting policing under real pressure at a time when the Met is facing an unprecedented challenge of dealing with increased demand in terms of volume, complexity and harm. The Met has already made over £600 million in savings and is now faced with making a further £400 million by 2021. The lack of funding will inevitably lead to police officer numbers continuing to fall. The Met must therefore continue to plan for the future and transform itself to meet the needs of Londoners. I welcome the recent Budget Committee report, which recognises the police funding crisis in London. It's also important to recognise there is far more to the borough mergers than response. It is the BCUs that will enable improvements to investigation, ensuring experienced detectives are dealing with the more complex crimes, and it's the BCUs that will improve safeguarding, protecting the most vulnerable by bringing together local services relating to domestic abuse, mental health and missing persons, with currently centralised sexual offence investigation and child protection to provide a joined-up and local specialist service. I want to see the evaluation which will provide a full picture of what has been learned and how the proposed model has evolved and will continue to do so.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Picking up on the very poor performance of all the 5 boroughs regarding response, I'd like to return to that, because you'll be aware that across London, across party indeed, there is widespread concern around the mergers, and one of the main concerns is around response times, particularly in those larger boroughs in outer London. So, Mr Mayor, do you accept, on the back of what you've just confirmed, that there is widespread concern around the mergers in London?
So in the 5 boroughs or elsewhere?
Well, across London generally, about the proposed mergers.
Oh, listen, of course, colleagues, political colleagues, MPs, councillors, assembly members are concerned about 32 going to 12. In those basic command units that are a bigger geographical area, there are understandable concerns about response times for the reasons you've alluded to in the 3 borough basic command units. But I hope I've been transparent about one of the reasons that's driving some of these mergers. I think there is an upside. The response times hopefully we can address, but on investigation, safeguarding and neighbourhoods, there will be improvements, I hope.
I mean, would you suggest, for example, the proposed boroughs were actually named, with the borough commanders, were named 8 or 9 months ago. Do you sense that it's kind of been mishandled?
I'm not sure about that. I think the general election there are a number of things that the general election have caused delays for and issues with, not just in policing. I think the police would be criticised if they didn't plan. Some of the things you've got to plan for months in advance, and so they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. I mean, they don't want to cause unnecessary concern, but I'm in favour of planning ahead. And so, had the general election not happened and we lost that time, would have been hopefully at a more advanced stage.
I think the danger is you're using the word they so much, because you must take, obviously, responsibilities.
Absolutely.
It's your police compliant plan. You and your deputy mayor would have agreed to that. As I've said earlier, there are many boroughs who have already written to you, mine and others, about the preferences that are designated in your plan. And many of those boroughs disagree quite strongly with the boroughs they've been twinned with, and I won't go into it because there's a lot of details around it. At what stage, Mr Mayor, will you basically direct the police to implement the borough mergers, in essence riding roughshod over the borough's objections?
Can I say, Chair, I'm really happy to be candid about this. I accept responsibility in relation to having to make the savings the government's requiring me to make. And let's not, as you're intending to do, forget history. History is we've had to make £600 million worth of cuts from 2012 until 2016. I've got to find another £400 million. And so I'm responsible for making those cuts imposed upon me by government. One of the ways we can make some savings is basic command units. Another way is closing front station offices. Another way is closing police stations. By the way, we're probably going to have to cut police officers as well. So look, the buck stops with me, but I only fund 25% of the policing budget. I've increased the policing precept. And actually, when I speak to politicians from all parties, privately and semi-publicly, they accept the government's got to step up and fund us better. If they funded us better, we wouldn't have to do some of these things.
It is all about choices, Mr Mayor, and all around this chamber we agree that
absolutely, that's what I keep saying to the government. It's about choices. Don't make the cuts.
Yeah, we agree that London deserves a good police settlement. That's the facts of it. Going on to closures of police stations, I believe you'll be announcing the final decisions in a few weeks' time. How do you feel that will be received by Londoners, particularly around confidence and engagement?
No, again, this is an example of us having to do this because of cuts imposed upon us by government. Nobody wants their police station to close down or the front office counter to close down. The only good news is actually the actual usage of these police stations and front office counters over years, because of phones and internet and other social media, has decreased, and people have other ways of contacting the police. We've restored dedicated ward officers in some wards, which means you can speak to a police officer face-to-face. So that's improved things, but I can't imagine many people campaigning to close their police station down. We know from history when Boris Johnson closed 63 down, nobody was campaigning to keep them open. He had to do that because of cuts imposed by a Conservative and Lib Dem government.
Okay, and lastly, you talked about it being driven by budget savings, and one couldn't disagree completely with that, but if you speak to senior police, as I do, for some considerable time, they've been wanting to move towards this model, predicated not just necessarily on finances, but that's a statement more than probably a question. It has been some time now. Your police and crime plan is getting on to a year old. In 3 or 4 months, you'll be 2 years in. When do you think, you've talked about savings out of this project, when do you think, in your mind's eye, that the borough mergers will be operational? When will the button be pressed, do you think?
So at the last Mayor's question time, I gave an assurance to Senator Dismore and to Senator Bacon that I'd be writing to them about the evaluation process. I'll write to them shortly, we're just finalising that now. I'd expect a decision to be made before the end of this year, but for the reasons you alluded to in relation to preparation, some preparation is taking place in relation to other parts of London for obvious reasons. And so I'd be surprised if that evaluation wasn't made available soon, with decisions made once they've been evaluated towards the end of this year or early next year.
I think, just to reflect on that, I think what we're probably looking at is some decision-making, in essence, 2 years into your mayoralty, which I think is fair to say, around springtime, and then there'll have to be sequential introductions to them. So it would suggest to me, and you may agree or disagree, that probably it'd have taken 2.5 years to actually get those models in place, and which is quite a long time when you're looking at proposed savings, Mr Mayor.
Well, I think there's a question there, Chair.
There is.
And the answer to that is, on the one hand, I'm being criticised for rushing ahead, On the other hand, I've been criticised for not bringing in the savings sooner. Which one is it?
I'm just having the discussion, Mr Mayor. Thank you very much.
That's politics, students.
Assembly Member Devonish.
Mr Mayor, during this process, consultation has not been seen to be open and transparent. Will you have a review at the end of this process of how you've communicated with residents? Because many of my residents are only just hearing about these closures. They have busy lives in London, and they are really, really concerned the process hasn't been fair and transparent, and it's already been prejudged. Rightly or wrongly, that's their perception. Will you review this at the end and come up with lessons learnt, please?
Sorry, Chair, is this about borough mergers?
Yes.
Okay, because I think you're conflating police station closures with borough mergers. Which one is it?
It's borough mergers.
Right.
That's been, you're absolutely right. People are hearing the same stories when they're talking about police station closures, because they do tend to mix the two things up.
All right.
But it's the lack of consultation and open transparency and communication.
Sure. Well, I'm happy to share, Chair, with the Assembly member the numbers who responded, and it's big numbers, which shows the consultation has been really important. And that's been not just by public meetings, not just through email, and not just through surveys, but other ways as well, including by elected politicians. But I'm happy always to learn lessons. You can always improve. And if there are lessons to learn, I think it's really important we do learn. And I'm always happy to take advice from colleagues around the table who know their communities better than I do. So please feel free to let me know how we can improve. But the last thing I want to do is to have a process that Londoners feel doesn't involve them. So I'm happy to take ideas, Chair.
Thank you. Assembly Member Prince.
Mr Mayor, would you be kind enough to comment on your Deputy Mayor's approach to discussing with the borough leaders in relation to the borough mergers in my patch and the others, that she felt it was appropriate to exclude both the Assembly members from that meeting with borough leaders?
Chair, I simply don't know about that, so let me look into that and I'll get back. I just don't know about that.
Do you think it, Mr Mayor, would be more appropriate if she's having a meeting with the borough leaders to discuss the tri-borough pathfinder in Havering, Redbridge and Barking and Dagenham, that she should at least have, do us the courtesy of inviting us to that meeting?
So sorry, I'm not sure if they've been excluded or not invited. Which one is it?
They're being excluded, Mr Mayor. I publicly asked her if she would invite myself and Assembly Member Desai, and she said no.
No.
I think it's most inappropriate that for a meeting that concerns two of my boroughs and one of Umesh's boroughs, that she would exclude us from such a meeting, Mr Mayor.
Well, I just don't know the facts, Chair. I'm happy to look into them and get back to the Assembly member.
Do you think that's the right thing to do, Mr Mayor?
Look, experience has taught me not to assume the premise of a proposition made by a Tory, but I'll look into it and get back to you.
I have to correct you, I'm not a Tory.
You're not a Tory?
No, I'm not a Tory.
No, I think we heard the first answer, that you will look into it and get back to Assembly Member Prince, and that the Assembly will be copied into that, because other members might have similar concerns.
That's what I didn't say.
Okay, let's go on to the next question in the name of Assembly Member Deputy Mayor McCartney.
Thank you for your question. The King's Fund and Nuffield Trust are both highly respected in health and care policy. This independent report, which I commissioned, provides a thorough analysis of the Sustainability and Transformation Plans, STP plans, in London. It is a considered piece of work, and I'm taking its findings seriously. We have a situation in London where there are plans to reduce beds and staffing, which in turn would have a knock-on effect on social care. The report is clear. London's NHS will have a funding gap of over £4 billion by 2020. We know that London's population is growing, the demand for healthcare is increasing, and our needs get more complex as the population grows. Rather than fewer beds as proposed in these plans, the King's Fund highlights the need for nearly 1,600 additional beds by 2021, as well as more staff. In response to the report's findings, I've set out 6 assurances that need to be addressed before I can support any future plans for health and care services. London must have sufficient hospital capacity. Plans to reduce beds must be carefully considered, and any proposals that reduce the number of beds must be independently reviewed. London needs the right investment. Proper funding must be identified and available to credibly deliver these SDP plans. All proposed changes must have engaged patients and the public and have clinical support. The plans must not widen health inequalities and show how they will close the gap in health inequality across London. The plans must also take into account any impact on social care, especially when boroughs are under such financial pressure. I'll continue to press London's NHS across these 6 assurances. London's health service must not be allowed to deteriorate at a time of increased demand.
Thank you. I think the report made sobering reading, and as my question stated with regards to the issue of hospital beds, the King's Fund report said that the plans were not credible. Locally, in my area of north central London, the plans have been met with that same level of scepticism by local people. We are looking in my area of consolidation of acute services, consolidation of specialist services onto fewer sites such as maternity. An alternative would be to say closure, and rationing of some forms of elective surgeries. I noticed the report suggested that yourself, as the London Health Board, could take a more citywide role and provide some strategic oversight into the STPs. Would you be willing to do that or not?
Well, I think it's really important to understand that devolution must mean power and resources. Without resources, the power is meaningless. And so I'm happy to take on the leadership role. I think the London Health Board is really important. I chair the London Health Board. I meet regularly with NHS London representative. We have a new one, Jane Cummins, who's doing a good job from NHS England. I think there is a role for the Mayor to play. I'm looking forward to finally signing the Memorandum of Understanding around health, which is the first step towards devolution. And I think, when it comes to these decisions being made, what's been raised previously by the Assembly are local politicians, local residents, local experts being excluded from the process before the decision has been taken. And if I can bring something to the table in relation to consultation, that's really important. But the key thing that the King's Fund found, which is beggars belief, is that the plans want to reduce beds at a time when actually we need more beds, which just doesn't make sense to me.
And you obviously have discussions with the health service from time to time, and I know that NHS across London are looking at this report. Do you think it will have an impact, and will you be able to use this report, do you think, to make the case to both NHS and government about the need for extra resources in our city?
So the good news is, one of the reasons why we asked King's Fund and Nuffield to do the work is they're independent, they're respected, and they've got no particular agenda. The good news is that the 5 STPs appear to have taken on board some of the points raised in the report. We have evidence already of 2 of them changing their minds about things, and hopefully they'll make that public shortly. But actually the crux of this is the need for resources, additional resources from central government. The crux of it is the NHS in London has been starved of the resources she needs to make sure she's fit for purpose. And so I've always said that my role is to both challenge and champion the NHS. And so I think you're seeing some movement amongst the STPs. I think NHS England recognises the STPs in London aren't working as they should. And I'm hoping some progress, particularly once we've signed the devolution package with the government.
Thank you.
Question from Assembly Member Arnold on disproportionality in BAME individuals in the criminal justice system.
Thank you. Discrimination and bias in our criminal justice system or any of our institutions is completely unacceptable. And I welcome David Lammy's review, which shines a detailed light on this important issue. Every Londoner has the right to be treated fairly and with respect, regardless of their ethnicity. As the government's recent published race disparity audit shows, people's experiences across education, employment, health, and housing, to name only a few, can vary with their ethnicity. I recognise the issues raised in David's review. That's why reducing disproportionality and inequality are key themes in my police and crime plan, and why I set out a commitment in my manifesto to review the matrix. In support of his review, my Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime met with David Lammy a number of times, as did colleagues from the Met Trident Command. The matrix is used to identify the most harmful gang members in a borough, with scores based on an individual's involvement in violence only. It has a number of uses, both in terms of enforcement and helping to identify individuals for support and intervention. But we need to ensure it's a fair and proportionate tool used in conjunction with other indicators. Through our review, it's crucial that we help communities to better understand how the Met Police Service target both street-level gangs and also those that organise or supply gangs. My police and crime plan is committed to ensuring there is a better criminal justice for London, and a key priority within this is to agree a memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Justice on devolution of elements of the criminal justice system to London, and a more joined-up approach to supporting victims and reducing reoffending. This is critical to ensuring greater transparency and trust in the criminal justice system in London.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Can I just focus now on the Trident Matrix? Because I share a concern about this matrix in its current form. I'm not arguing against its existence. I'm just saying that it might, well, it's possible that something has gone wrong. Just the figures alone lead to, some questions. The figures that I've picked out of David Lammy's report and of work that's been done by Liberty is showing about 87% of the young people listed in the matrix are from black and minority ethnic background. When you look at their percentage in the population, this is about 3 times their percentage in the population or more. That sort of disproportionate level is worrying, isn't it?
It is.
Right.
Just to underscore your point, actually the latest figures I have, 99% male, 88% BAME, 79% under 25. And so you're right, these figures look disproportionate in relation to the general population, and that's why there's a review taking place.
Yeah. And so let me just be clear what you've said, that the Trident Matrix is under review specifically.
Correct.
And I wasn't clear about the time scale and how that would be reported.
Well, I'm happy for Sophie Lynn to give you a briefing on this issue, but it's been reviewed as we speak.
Right.
David Lamb has been consulted in relation to the matrix and how it works. By the way, the Met also appreciate that there should be a review of this. I don't want the impression to be given that this is MOPAC imposing a review of the Met Police Service. It really is a collegiate approach from the Met Police Service. The objective, as you know, is to reduce gang-related violence. And so the objective is a noble one, but the point David made is you don't want to inadvertently, with the best of intentions, cause problems, and that's why we're reviewing it.
Yeah, because as it stands, it does feed this negative narrative about young black Londoners, if you like, focusing on London, when in fact it is young black Londoners who are disproportionately affected by sort of criminalities that Trident was set up to deal with. So the thing seems to have just grown like topsy, and some urgent work is needed.
Absolutely, and the Commissioner made this point that when the Commissioner met victims of knife crime and gang-related crime, the point she made was those who are the victims are black Londoners.
Yes.
And what nobody wants is a disproportionate use from the criminal justice service on black Londoners, presuming them to be offenders. And so what you don't want is to inadvertently lead to a situation where the public doesn't have confidence in the police. Policing by consent only works if the public has confidence in the police to report things, to give intelligence, to help them fight crime. One of the reasons, again, for reviewing this is because the police want to be more effective, and Trident and others are really happy to go along with the review.
Right. Well, I know from the report that there's supposedly 18 gang boroughs. I mean, the term is worrying to me, but in documentation, that's what's used. So with your offer that your deputy will meet up with me, if I can extend that to other Assembly members, because I know my colleague, Assembly Member Desai, and I, sharing borders, we have similar concerns, and other members might have similar concerns, and then arrange a meeting with her for an update.
Absolutely. Can I also suggest, Chair, I think David's report is just so good, but it covers CPS, it covers courts, it covers prisons, it covers yachts, it covers the parole board, it covers probation. And Matthew Ryder, my other Deputy Mayor for Social Integration and Community Cohesion, was also involved with some of the work that David Lamb was doing. So again, maybe sensible for Sophie and Matthew to be present, because it affects more than one area for the reasons you allude to and stuff. But I don't think we can ignore the points that David Lammy's made. The good news is I decided to have a review before David Lammy's report in my manifesto because I saw the points you were raising. We've got to get this right. We've not got it right yet.
No, thank you for that. And I'll liaise with colleagues and with Sophie and Matthew. Yeah. Thank you. Back, you think you could introduce the next one while I've got my breath? What a supportive deputy
the next question is from Assembly Member Bacon, and it relates to private hire operators' licence fees.
Thank you for the question.
Thank you.
I'm committed to reviewing operator licence fees as part of my action plan for taxi and private hire services published last September because the current fees were unsustainable and unfair. In the 4 years since fees were last reviewed, the industry has changed dramatically. Licensed private hire drivers have increased from 65,000 to more than 116,000, and the number of private hire vehicles has increased from 50,000 to 88,000. This brings additional compliance costs. If TfL didn't do this, then the cost of regulating private hire vehicles would have to be covered elsewhere in TfL. And with the loss of £2.8 billion government grant, the increase in costs would effectively have been passed on to public transport fare payers. The new fees will now reflect the varied size of operators' fleets and the increase in drivers and vehicles in the sector. It was unfair that until this review, an operator with 11 vehicles in its fleet paid the same total fee as one with 30,000. TfL has recruited 250 additional compliance officers to combat illegal activity and to address issues caused by the growing number of licensed drivers and vehicles. Operators will pay 17% of total taxi private hire licensing, compliance and enforcement costs. In the next 5 years, TfL estimates that the cost of enforcing private hire operators will rise from 4 million to 30 million. It's only right this cost should be borne by the private hire operators who are responsible for this growth and not passed on to public transport fare payers.
Thank you for that response, Mr. Mayor. There's nothing surprising in it because it's all been cribbed from the impact assessment written by TfL's TPH department themselves and also in the board papers that went to TfL board on the 15th of September. As chairman of the TfL board then, can I assume that you support these changes in their entirety?
Sorry, I just didn't hear you.
Did you hear none of that?
No, I'm sorry.
Can we turn up the microphones, please? Okay. Thank you for the response. As I said in the outset of my remarks, all of that is contained in both the impact assessment that TfL themselves drew up and was in the TfL board papers that went to the board on the 15th of September. Would I be right in assuming that you support these recommendations in their entirety?
Yep.
You do? Okay, that's fine. Have you discussed with small and medium-sized private hire operators the impact that these proposals will have on their businesses?
TfL had, yes.
Have they? That's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll come back to that in a moment. The increases that we're talking about range from, at the lowest point, 34% in the first year. If you have a cab firm with 11 to 20 vehicles, it's going up by 112%. There's 511 firms in London that will impact. Between 21 and 50, it goes up by 572.3%. That's 686 companies. Between 51 and 100 cars goes up by 962%. That's 190. Are you content that those price increases are reasonable?
Well, what I wasn't content with is a situation where previously somebody with 11 vehicles was paying 2,826. Somebody with 11,000 was paying 2,826. And so I think TfL are right to bring in increased bands. As a result of the consultation, they've made further changes. There's now a couple more additional tiers within the bands, as you know, and they've allowed instalments to address the issue that you're alluding to, where a small to medium-sized operator can't pay up front the application fee. But look, compliance costs are going up. As I've explained, even now with these changes, only 17% of the total regulatory licensing and compliance costs will come from the operators. There'll be another review next year, by the way, and we've got to make sure that those who use tubes and buses and London Overground and trams aren't having to unnecessarily subsidise private hire vehicle operators.
Okay, I'm going to put something to you, Mr. Mayor. I'm quoting it, and it will take a second or two, so please bear with me. I'm going to read it out. The proposals could mean a number of small or medium-sized specialist operators leaving the market or being deterred from joining the market, which would reduce choice and could increase fares for consumers. This could have an adverse impact on individuals in protected groups who use PHV services to a greater extent than the rest of the general population. The changes may also result in a restricted range of work opportunities for private hire drivers, a large proportion of whom are within protected groups, including part-time workers. Do you agree with that?
I think it's a fair point somebody's making, but I've got to balance the fact that, as you know, TfL is losing almost £3 billion from the government. I think it's unfair, bearing in mind the cost of living concerns raised by Fiona Twycross in relation to the last few years, where public transport fares in TfL went up by 42%. That private hire operation have a situation where somebody who has 11,000 cars is paying the same amount of fees as somebody who has 11 cars. That can't be right.
You've mentioned that twice now, Mr Mayor. Of course, as we all know, there is only one operator with 11,000 cars, and whilst I would understand that you would want to refer to that because it is a lot and it would seem inappropriate, and nobody is opposing the idea that there should be a graded fee structure. It's the scale of the adjustment to the grading and the consequence it's going to have that seems to be causing the problem. This particular document, which is actually the paper that went to the TfL board, goes on to state, it is appropriate and justified that operators, drivers and vehicle licensees pay appropriately for the proportionate costs of the licensing regime associated with them. Well, it might be appropriate to TfL, but do you think it's appropriate to private hire businesses that have been in operation for decades to face 1,000% increases in their charges? Well,
I'll give you another example. If you object to me raising Uber for reasons we can all understand.
I'm not talking about Uber.
Let me raise another example. Somebody who has 100 drivers pays the same as somebody who has 11 drivers. Somebody who has 600 drivers pays the same as somebody who has 11 drivers. Somebody who has 1,000 drivers pays the same as has 11 drivers. It can't be right that the public transport fare payer is subsidising operators. Now, I understand it'll cause problems for small to medium-sized private hire vehicle operators. That's why TfL have made a couple of big changes. We've added additional tiers, but also allowed instalment payments as well. But, the choice that I've got as the chair of TfL is to have a situation where we have to have public transport fare payers subsidising private hire operators, or we allow them to pay more. By the way, still only 17%. The rest, 83%, has been subsidised by TfL elsewhere.
Mr Mayor, I'll pick you up on the example you just gave. You talked about people with 100 cars having to pay the same as people with 10, and as I said in my remarks earlier on, I don't think anybody, including the industry itself, objects to the idea that there should be some change to the current system. But is it really fair? If you have 10 times as many vehicles as the smallest operator, and their fees go up by 34%, why should yours go up by 962%?
Well, I've got the operator fees here.
So have I. I'm quoting directly from them.
Sure, and it is a spectrum of fees depending on the size of
yes,
your
but the point
fleet.
I just made to you, Mr Mayor, 10 times the vehicles, why is the charge, how much is that, 800 times different?
Well, look, TfL put forward a proposition which was consulted on, and I'm sure you'd have made that point in the response consultation.
Yep, 75% opposed it.
Yeah, they've made a couple of changes in relation to the points made. Now, can I just say this point, Chair? And another thing that was welcomed when I announced it, I think it was welcomed, I'm not sure there's been a U-turn, but quadrupling the number of compliance officers from 80 to 330. Why? Because Londoners were concerned about safety. Now, it was welcomed at the time. Those compliance officers have to be paid for. Similarly, licensing, similarly, regulation. So if the Assembly member has a proposition how we can fill that void elsewhere, I'm really happy to look at it. Maybe he'll put forward an amendment at the budget when it comes forward, but I've got to make sure I balance the books. This is the first time in 17 years TfL's operating costs have gone downwards, not upwards, at the same time as freezing TfL fares. I think Londoners welcome that.
Mr Mayor, the consequence of this is very likely to be that TfL has nobody to regulate after it is put in because people are going to go out of business. I've got correspondence in front of me, which I'm very happy to send to you, from a multitude of interested parties, including individual cab companies, the LPHCA, the Private Hire Board, and the G&B Trade Union, who I don't normally quote in public meetings approvingly, but on this case I agree with completely. And they are all united in their view that the scale of the changes that are being implemented by TfL's board, the direct result will be decades-old businesses will go bust, widespread job losses, less choice for consumers, increased prices, and a vastly diminished service. How does this, Mr Mayor, correspond with your ambition to be the most pro-business mayor that London's ever had?
Well, the worst thing for businesses in London is an extreme Tory hard Brexit. And that's why I'm campaigning against that. And that demonstrates what a pro-business mayor I am, Chair.
Madam Chair, this is when you intervene and ask him to answer the question.
Running out of time,
That was a nonsense answer. Seriously, that was completely...
I'm really sorry, Chair, but with respect...
Mr Mayor,
pro-business
has got nothing to do with private hire. Absolutely nothing to do with private hire. Listen, can you take this seriously? Because there are a lot of people whose livelihoods are going to be wiped out by this change.
Okay.
Can you intervene?
Assembly Member Bacon, just put your question again.
Well, I was doing that, but you interrupted me.
Oh, sorry. Let's have your
Can
question
I,
again.
as my last point, Mr Mayor, can I plead with you to intervene with Transport for London, freeze this, take another look at it, and properly consult with the drivers themselves and with the companies, and come up with something that is more reasonable than this?
Well, TfL have consulted with the private hire vehicle industry. They've consulted with operators. They've consulted with small businesses. They meet regularly with small and medium-sized businesses. I'm reassured their proposals are good ones. I think it's right and proper for private hire vehicle operators to pay more than they currently do, particularly when you've seen the growth over the last 8 years. And depending which day of the week we ask a Tory member their views, they've been against that growth. I'm in favour of a vibrant, flourishing private hire vehicle and taxi business in London. But I think it's right and proper. They pay more towards their licensing, their regulation and their compliance. And I don't think it's right and proper for public transport fare payers and the tube, the bus and London Overground and trams to be subsidising private hire vehicle operators.
Okay.
Mr Mayor, is the definition of a vibrant industry a dead industry?
Well, I can give you the figures again, which shows the thriving industry we have. And I'm happy to give it to you, Chair, because I think it's really important when students are present that they're informed of the facts. The facts are we've seen an increase from 65,000 to more than 116,000 in drivers, and for vehicles from 50,000 to 88,000. That's a thriving industry.
Okay, thank you. Any other follow-up questions on this matter? No. Assembly Member Prince, you're not coming in. Thank you. Let's move on then, and it's Assembly Member Boff, private rented sector.
Thank you, Chair. The private rented sector has grown substantially in recent years, and that increase looks set to continue. In 1990, around 11% of households in London were renting privately. That's now risen to over 28%, and according to one forecast on current trends, the private rented sector could grow to accommodate 40% of London households by 2040. We know that part of this increase is a result of new homes being built, but much of it comes from growth of the private rented sector within homes that already exist. That is why, as well as making sure we boost the supply of newly built homes for private rent, we need to make sure all Londoners who rent get a better deal. Over 2 million Londoners, including over 500,000 children, already live in the private rented sector. We need to do all we can to help with the challenges they face over costs, standards and stability. Whilst clearly any private homes can usually be rented out by their owner, where I can have the greatest impact is by encouraging the growth of purpose-built private rented housing, often known as build-to-rent. Build-to-rent can be a good thing. High-quality, well-designed homes with longer tenancy, stable rent increases and higher standards of management are to be welcomed. Build-to-rent developments can also have clear benefits in terms of boosting overall housing supply in London. They can be built quicker than conventional development for sale, they tap into a broader market and they can attract new investment. My draft London housing strategy sets out a package of support for new build-to-rent supply in London. I've been very encouraged by the positive response to this guidance by the sector and by the continued growth in the pipeline of new build-to-rent homes. There are estimated to be more than 9,000 build-to-rent homes under construction in London now, equivalent to 15% of all private house building, and another 22,000 granted planning permission.
Thank you. In light of Jeremy Corbyn's recent comments in favour of rent controls, will you rule out the use of rent control in London and oppose any attempt to introduce it?
I think we need to control the levels of rent increases in London. One of the things that I welcome about build-to-rent is they have longer tenancies up to 3 years, and during those 3 years the rent only goes up by inflation. One of the reasons why build-to-rent has led to big demands from Londoners. I also welcome the announcement from Sajid Javid, who recognises that rent's going up too much, and I welcome the conversion, the U-turn if you like, of the Conservative Party to bring some control to rent levels in London.
Well, it's the world of U-turns. Do you not therefore stand by your commitment to me in May 2016 MQT that you have no plans to introduce rent control?
But it depends how you define rent control. I think nobody is suggesting going back to a New York system of the 1970s. What we're talking about is stabilising rent. There are different models we can talk about, whether it's Paris or Berlin or New York. What I'm in favour of is within a longer tenancy, rent's only going up by inflation. So if we have 3-year tenancies between every year, rather than ridiculous 10, 12, 15% increases, only go up by inflation. You don't pay every 12 months a fee to a letting agent. In between those 3 or 4 year tenancies, of course they can go up, and they should not unreasonably go up by the landlords. I don't think anybody's talking about a 1970s style rent control system. Neither Jeremy nor John Healey.
Will you come forward with your proposals for rent control in London?
What I'm working on is a London model, and the London model is an idea which I set in my draft housing strategy. And the idea is speaking to tenants and to landlords about a template which we can persuade the government to use going forward. And some of the things we'll talk about in that is, one of the concerns landlords raised with me, for example, is the issue of gaining access to a property for legitimate reasons. One of the issues raised by tenants is the issue of security of tenure, but also rent increases. So the London model will be a way of going forward, and I'm happy to come back to you once we've got that ready after consultation. That will be sent to government about what we think should be the offer made to renters and landlords in London.
Will you take into account that the Cambridge University study that found that rent controls would reduce the supply of PRS homes at a time when we need to increase them?
Again, it depends on definition of what you mean by rent control. I'm in favour of stabilising rents in London, controlling the rents in London. I'm not talking about a 1970s model, and nor is the Labour Party. And John Healey is doing work as we speak, consulting people around the country about what form of model that should be. And by the way, even the Conservative Party has done a welcome U-turn on this issue, and I welcome that. And I hope the Tories in the Assembly will also see sense.
Rent controls exist. The quote from Jeremy Corbyn, it says, rent controls exist in many cities around the world, and I want our cities to have those powers too. Which model are you using?
I'm not using any model. I'm using my own model, the London model. I think the point Jeremy was making is that around the world, what you would call capitalist cities, I don't want to talk about Venezuela, God forbid, but capitalist cities have used a form of rent control from successful cities, from Berlin to Paris to other parts of the world. There's no reason we should be scared of this. And I welcome the fact that the Secretary of State for Community and Local Government is now talking about this. We want to push him further.
So presumably you won't be using the rent control that in Stockholm, which has led to a chronic shortage of housing and an average wait of 21 years for a new home.
I'm not a big fan of the Sweden model, no.
No. Not the model in Manhattan, where young people have to regularly check the death columns in order to get accommodation that's affordable to them?
I'm in favour of a London model.
Okay. And thank goodness you've written off the Venezuela model. Could you have a word with your party leader so that he can write off the Venezuela model?
Just a point of information, if you do speak to the Prime Minister soon, Venezuela is on planet Earth.
Sorry, I didn't understand.
I think the point I'd make is, I mean, look, anybody below the age of 50 who lives in London understands this is a big problem. And I'm astonished that the Tories in the Assembly don't think it's a big problem. The price of rent in London is exorbitant. It costs the same price to rent a one-bedroom property in London than a three-bedroom home any other part of England. That can't be right.
You'll be familiar with Christine Whitehead, who's the housing expert at the London School of Economics, who said who confirmed that rent controls only work where you don't need them.
That's the point, Chair. The definition of rent controls that some members of the Conservative Party are using shows they're stuck in the 1970s, not the 2017.
Thank you.
Any more questions, Assembly Member Both? Thank you. Let's go then to the same topic, but London Road Landlord Database from Assembly Member Pigeon.
Thank you for your question. I'm committed to helping London's 2 million private renters to get a better deal. That includes by doing all I can to drive out the minority of criminal landlords and letting agents in the capital. My name and shame database, on which information will be easily and publicly available to Londoners for the first time, is a key part of this. I'm pleased to say this database will launch by the end of this year. Initially, the database will include details of landlords and letting agents who have faced enforcement action by 6 London boroughs or the London Fire Brigade. The London Fire Brigade and the 6 London boroughs, Brent, Camden, Kingston, Newham, Southwark and Sutton, have worked with my team to develop and test the database over the course of this year. Following the launch, we're keen to bring on board the remaining London boroughs, many of whom I know are standing ready to do so. By being publicly accessible, We intend the database to deter bad practice in the sector and allow tenants to check landlords or agents before they sign a rental agreement. Currently, landlords know a lot about a prospective tenant, but a tenant knows very little about their landlord. This database is the first step towards making the rental market fairer and more transparent for tenants, empowering Londoners to make better choices about who they rent from. In parallel to my work, government is developing a national rogue landlord database solely for use by local authorities. I believe government should make this national database public so that tenants across the UK have access to this information.
Thank you for your answer. Can I just be clear, will landlords convicted of fire safety offences be included on the rogue landlord database?
Yep.
And will that include both local authority information, who obviously hold a lot of fire safety information about private landlords, but also the enforcement work taken by London Fire Brigade?
Yep.
Brilliant, okay. And will all that information be on straight away with the pilot, or will it be once it's rolled out?
So there'll be a public tier and a private tier. The public tier will have these prosecutions for a year because of the advice we received from Rehabilitation of Offenders Act. So because it's spent after a year. So the public tier for a year after conviction. There'll be a private tier available to councils, and it'll be longer, it'll be I think 10 years on the private tier. And there's good news is there's been interest from other boroughs other than the 6, and I think once we're live, don't be surprised if others come on board pretty quickly.
Okay, and so what's your timescale to have all of the other boroughs onto your database?
Well, I can't force them. It's a voluntary scheme. I mean, there's interest already there. We'll launch the first 6 and the London Fire Brigade this year. I'd be disappointed if by the end of next year there weren't more on board, but I suspect there'll be tranches because it depends how good their information is. Those that are licensed in boroughs will probably be more advanced. Those that aren't, maybe a bit behind.
Okay, very good. I think it's a really, really important tool for those who rent privately, and as you said earlier, 28% going up potentially to 40%. We really need to protect those tenants. Related to this, do you agree with the Information Commissioner's statement that public organisations holding relevant fire safety information should publish these records proactively? I think it's really important, particularly post-Grenfell, for there to be maximum transparency so people can make choices themselves. I'd caution that with one thing: we don't want to spread panic or alarm. And sometimes, so it's not in an arrogant, patronising way, but lay people don't understand the nuances of what a report inspection says. And so as long as it's explained in language that people weren't alarmed by unless there's reason to be alarmed, I think transparency is always a good thing. And have you taken any action on this recommendation from the Information Commissioner? Yeah, so the LFB are doing renewed inspections of the various properties across London, 33 councils, and they're in discussions with councils about those inspections, about what work they've done since the last inspection post-Grenfell. And don't be surprised if quite a few of those things are made public. Okay, so you're going to make sure as much as within your power to make sure things... Exactly. I mean, I've got to be careful what limited powers I have, but also what you don't want to do is cause panic and alarm, because, for example, somebody can make a choice as a consequence of reading an inspection to leave a building and go somewhere less safe than the building they were in, and so we've got to be a bit careful about not unnecessarily spreading panic or alarm, and so you've got to be a bit responsible with the information. Okay, thank you. Another question relating to the private rented sector. From the 1st of April 2018, private rented properties will require a minimum energy performance rating of E in terms of their energy performance certificate. And in your draft environment strategy, you say you're going to work with local authorities to enforce these regulations for energy efficiency. How are you going to be able to enforce these regulations, and are you going to be providing any resources to help local authorities? Well, it's not for us to enforce local authorities. I believe in devolution. I believe in devolution as low as down as possible. So I'm not in favour of taking powers away from local authorities or stepping on their toes. And so it's about conversations and talking to them. We're doing more and more work with local authorities, with the London Borough's Private Rented Sector Partnership. All 33 boroughs are on there. We've met a few times, my team and them. That's led me to be very confident about a willingness from local authorities to work in this area. And one of the reasons we're doing that is to improve enforcement and to drive up standards. The good news is there's an appetite there. The bad news is local authorities are stretched financially, as indeed we are. And so we've got to make the case why it's worth doing this. And I think
I think, demand from consumers and politicians helps.
And will you be, once this is up and running and there are potentially prosecutions for lack of energy efficiency, will that also feature on your database?
That's a good question. So what's at the moment, that's not the plan, because it's a landlord to do with criminal convictions, rogue landlords, but because of public opinion moving, because we know the seriousness of bad energy in homes, we need to think about making information more transparent. It's a balance to be struck, because obviously what we don't want to do is inadvertently penalise landlords who are taking action. And so that's one of the things under discussion, what we could publish in the future. At the moment, we're quite clear in relation to what we're going to publish, criminal prosecutions from enforcement teams, health and safety, London Fire Brigade, but we'll keep it under review. That's one of the reasons why the London Borough's private rented sector partnership is such an important forum.
Lovely, thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's go to the next question. Counter-terrorism, in the name of Assembly Member Desai.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Member Desai, and thank you for the recent Budget and Performance Committee report, Who's Paying the Bill, which looks at the Met's financial challenge. My Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime is currently reviewing the report, and we will respond to the findings once we've thoroughly considered the proposals set out. It's essential that the government provide the additional resources the police so badly need to keep Londoners safe. Chief Constable Sarah Thornton, Chair of the National Police Chiefs Council, said out last month that counter-terror funding for policing is being cut by more than 7% in the next 3 years. This is on top of the funding crisis in the local policing budgets. We know that policing terrorist events have cost implications for local policing. Each one puts a huge strain on policing resources, mobilising specialist operations and pulling officers into extra shifts and away from daily duties. For every £1 spent from the counter-terrorist budget in response to the Westminster attack, a further £2 was spent by local policing, for example. Supporting counter-terror funding is not sufficient if funding for local policing is falling. Falling resilience of local neighbourhood policing will cut off the intelligence that's so crucial to preventing attacks. Only this week, I met with the New York Police Commissioner to discuss policing in 2 of the world's greatest metropolises. The number of police officers per head of population in London is over 20% smaller than that of New York. And yet, due to funding pressures, we're likely to go below 30,000 police officers. Clearly, this is not good enough. This dangerous underfunding simply can't be allowed to continue. And when I met the Prime Minister earlier this week, I made that point, that the government must end the underfunding, which is putting the safety of the British public at risk.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've got 3 or 4 questions to ask you, so if I can ask you to be as brief as possible. Amber had said recently that it's too simplistic to blame police cuts when asked about anti-terrorist operations. Now, of course, I accept there are many factors at play here, and we know what Sarah Thornton has had to say about this. And I quote what she said, that resources are going to be part of the conversation. It seems to me that there's a discrepancy here, certainly in terms of emphasis on the funding situation. So who is right? And in particular, I want to, again, carrying on the theme of resources, on Tuesday, the Department of Transport updated guidance to local councils on terrorism. The last time such guidance was issued was in 2003. Local authorities have been asked to improve street lighting, CCTV blind spots, amongst many other things, all of which, of course, requires money. Now, would you agree with me that the Department of Transport can't have it both ways, asking local authorities to do all these things, which are very important, such as street lighting, but not then telling them where the money is going to come from? Would you liaise with London councils and other relevant agencies to get this message across to the Department of Transport?
Sure. First, look, the responsibility for terrorism lies with the terrorists. And let's be clear, they're to blame for the terrorism. But there are things we can do to try and minimise the chances of terrorists succeeding, to thwart terrorist attacks, but also, when they happen, to minimise the harm and the fatalities. The police advises that actually policing is, you treat it as a whole, and resources is a factor. But you're right, we can't give responsibilities on councils to do further stuff, not give them the resources. And so I'll be lobbying the government to provide the resources that we need.
I accept that answer. Very quickly, because bearing in mind the time that I have. It has been reported recently that a key ingredient in the bombs used in Parsons Green and in Manchester was hydrogen peroxide, which is commonly available. Since March last year, the sale of this particular item has been restricted. But Chris Hunter, we are a former bomb disposal expert, tells us through the Times that the substance is still fairly easy to purchase. as some retail outlets will not get out the necessary checks. In particular, what is worrying is sales through online sites. How are you, or how do you intend to work with the Home Office and other agencies to ensure that online and high street retailers are doing everything they can to stop these materials getting in the wrong hands? We have the same situation with acid attacks and sulfuric acid.
Sure, so there's the industrial materials, and then there's the consumer retail ones. And so we need to tighten up on the industrial and the retail. And the counter-terror lead, Mark Rowley, is well aware of this and is in discussions with the Home Office in relation to this issue. And
finally, your response to the Harris review. You told us at the police committee that it will be out sometime in October. Well, we are very nearly halfway through October. Have you got a date in mind?
Well, the Harris review was published on October the 27th last year. Yeah. So don't be surprised if our response is published on October 27th this year.
Thank you very much.
Assembly Member Dismore.
Thank you, Chair. Could you ask about the detective shortage in the Met, which has been a problem for some time and clearly impacts on counter-terrorism as well? In the summer, it was reported the Met was recruiting initial 80 training detective constables with full police powers who'd never worked as uniformed officers. Assistant Commissioner Gallen apparently wrote to every detective due to retire this year and asked them to stay on, as the force at that time was short of 748 detectives. The employment agency is reported as having set up its own office in Scotland Yard, charging them hundreds of thousands of pounds to recruit 77 detectives who've just retired on full pension. And the reports of stressed detectives being bombarded with 20 cases at once who are quitting the role and going back to uniform, which is all pretty serious. So can you say how many detectives the Met's currently short, what the barriers are as you see them to filling the vacancies, and what progress is being made in recruiting detectives to fill those vacancies?
Well, so a number of things we're doing to fill the vacancies of detectives. By the way, it's a nationwide issue, as you know, across England and Wales. You'll be aware, and you referred to this in your question, in relation to the letter Deputy Commissioner Craig Mackey wrote to retired detective constables in relation to them coming back to coach, them coming back to be civilian detectives and other roles they could play. So that's one of the things that the Deputy Commissioner did. Secondly, more coaching, more training of those who are police officers to train them up to be detectives. And thirdly, you'll be aware of one of the advantages. I appreciate your concerns around response time. One of the advantages of the basic command unit is getting detectives doing complex cases. This is a national problem, though, and we're doing what we can. There are still shortages in London, and that's one of the reasons why one of the operational advantages of the basic command units is detectives being able to do complex cases because of the mergers.
How many are we short at present?
There is a figure which I can send to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Next question. It's from Assembly Member Whittle. Global financial futures.
Sure, Chair. Can I just, for the avoidance of doubt, just clarify the misapprehension in the question, which is that Brexit hasn't happened. But I'm proud that London has some of the most talented financiers, lawyers and business professionals in the world. Last month's Yen Global Financial Centres survey that was referred to in the question was collected within a 24-month period up to June 2017, a period in which the UK voted to leave the European Union but has continued to be part of it, fully integrated into the single market and customs union. All the reasons I believe London is the world's leading financial services centre are endorsed by the survey's respondents. Our legal system is world-renowned and instills confidence in investors. Our regulation is fair and our tax rates competitive. Our unique concentration of finance and professional services firms is unrivalled. London's key strength builds on centuries of expertise and experience. They also build on our membership of the EU and its benefits for London and the UK, such as access to the single market and to the talent of 1 million Europeans who live, study and work in our city. The Yen Global Financial Centres Index also mentions the concern survey respondents had around the uncertainty caused by Brexit. This fact alone has forced some of London's banks and insurance firms to get ready to move jobs to the continent. 9,770 roles are officially at risk according to the City of London Corporation. And one of the issues raised in the survey was, and I quote, the fear that London will become an also-ran after Brexit. I hope and believe that London will continue to be a strong financial centre and global hub for the world's businesses, but when Brexit happens, and we shouldn't pretend there isn't a big risk to our economy if we don't get it right.
Thank you. I take that you are pleased about London retaining its position, Mr. Mayor.
Yep.
I hope that you also congratulate the fact and be pleased about the fact that the Dutch firm TMF has decided to have its headquarters here, and seeing Brexit not as a barrier to choosing London, but in fact as an opportunity. You say that we haven't left, and you keep saying this, but the fact is that before we had the referendum, all of the arguments were basically about how quite quickly, quite soon, there would be a recession, and also that people would start to move from London, which has not happened. And I think that really, surely you should be, as mayor, and I know I've said this on the past 2 occasions on this question time, should you not be promoting London and the good things about London and the good economic news about London, rather than saying constantly that there is doubt about what is going to happen?
Crikey, I'm often criticised for being too optimistic. I've never been criticised for being a doom merchant. I think London's a great city in the world. And in the answer I just gave to you, I explained why the underlying strengths of London, our legal system, our fair and competitive tax rates, our unique concentration of finance professional services, our ecosystem will stay even after we left Brexit. When I meet chief executives, I make that very point.
The point is, Mr. Mayor, that they would all be going like lemmings at the moment if what you said about Brexit was the case. I mean, this is just today. You know, the good news keeps coming. I can barely keep up with it myself. Look, London retains global top spot. What I would ask you is that, do you think, therefore, that business obviously needs certainty? You'd be the first to say that. Isn't it, therefore, rather dangerous to do as you do, and that is talk about second referendums and things like this? This is not really the sort of thing that creates certainty for business in London.
Sure. Talk about certainty. Can you tell me the terms of trade we're going to do with the EU when we leave the EU? What will the tariff be on goods?
No, look, this is not the point. You're going off the point, Mr. Mayor. I mean, the fact is all...
You're well off the point. Can you come... No, in your last few minutes, get back to the yen global financial futures. Any more questions on that to the Mayor?
No, I think I've run out.
Okay, right. Next question from Assembly Member Sahota, bail and release without restriction.
Thank you for your question. The old system of police bail was not working efficiently, and some people were left in limbo for unnecessary protracted periods of time. Change was needed. The new system has already seen fewer people released on police bail and more people released under investigation. This is a direct consequence of the change in legislation regarding police bail that came into effect in April this year. In line with national trends, the numbers of people released on pre-charge bail has dropped significantly. Based on the first 4 months of the new legislation, the percentage of suspects released on bail has dropped from 35% to 6% within the Met. Prior to the new legislation, there was no option to release a person under investigation. In August, the percentage released within this category was 28%. When taken together, these two new categories roughly equate to those on pre-charge bail on the old system. That is 34% under the new system and 35% under the old legislation. However, it's important to note that this change is still in its early days, and full data are currently only available for the first 4 months of the new legislation. As a consequence of this, it's too early to draw full conclusions about the effectiveness of this new process. However, MOPAC will continue to monitor it. Through discussions with the Commissioner and her team, we'll continue to seek assurance from the Met that they have in place robust performance information to monitor these changes, and that they're seeking to understand what effect these changes are having. It's vital that we're reassured that the new system ensures that those who should be brought to justice are, and that victims and witnesses are not let down by the criminal justice system.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. Of course, I can understand that this legislation is intended to reduce the amount of time people are on bail unnecessarily. But this is also put extra pressure on the police forces. And we've also had reports in the Daily Mail and then the Times of murderers, rape and terror suspects being released under investigation without proper bail conditions on them. And the CPS did say that if an upper limit is thought to be absolutely necessary, it needs to be set in a realistic, tough period of time, which takes account on the complexity and difficulty of cases and doesn't put the prosecution at a disadvantage. 28 days would be wholly inappropriate and unworkable, given the reality of police resources and the conflicting demands. The question I'm really making here is that an obligation is placed on the police, they're underfunded, there aren't enough detectives, and that what's happening, right, is that the police force are being stretched, right, and are being underfunded and can't comply with the regulation placed on, and they are therefore using the bail less appropriately than they previously.
It's just worth reminding colleagues who aren't experts like you that actually the advantage of bailing somebody is you can put conditions on their bail, whereas releasing somebody who's under investigation, you can have no conditions. And there are very good reasons often where it takes the police time to determine whether somebody should be charged or no further action. The availability of witnesses, the processing of forensic evidence, DNA stuff, looking at digital evidence, trying to retrieve this, getting advice from the CPS. And the concern you're expressing is the concern that actually are we inadvertently making the police do a huge amount of work in the first 28 days for fear of having to release somebody who should be charged. And I accept that concern that you have, particularly at a time when we've seen police resources go down, crimes become more complex and police resources be more stretched. On the other hand, we all know of examples where people who were arrested were kept on bail for ages and ages and ages and ages, and the uncertainty, stress and anxiety that caused them and their families. And so there's a balance to be struck. And my view is this: if the government was going to move to this new system, which I broadly welcome, they should have given the police more resources to reach the conclusion they need to reach within the 28 days. Because after 28 days, a senior officer has got to decide whether to extend to 3 months, and a magistrate exceptionally for 6 months. The alternative is somebody being released who probably shouldn't be without conditions, and that's the concern that victims and some of the newspapers you referred to are expressing. And that's why I make the point again, it goes back to resources from the government. If you're going to change legislation and the consequences stretching the police, give them the resources so they're not stretched.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is something which Londoners will be watching out for, right? And I really congratulate you on your continued campaign, and on behalf of Londoners, that we get more resources for the police service that we require so desperately.
Okay, thank you. Next question is sorry, no. I've done it. I've agreed to swap. So the next question, Mayor, is an answer to Assembly Member Prince's question on Alzheimer's sufferers on Transport for London services.
Can I thank you for asking this really important question on a really important issue. I'm committed to making London, including the transport network, dementia-friendly. We must make sure our services help people with the condition so they can lead full and active lives for as long as they can. Helping those who are vulnerable is the very essence of a civilised society. As our population ages, this is becoming more important for London and across the country. My transport strategy sets out how TfL will use a healthy streets approach. This will improve our services and street design to help Londoners to make active travel choices, to help them keep healthy and tackle the onset of dementia. I'm also committed to making sure London's transport network is accessible for all Londoners. That's why I'm investing a record £200 million for step-free access on the London Underground over 5 years. For those living with dementia, my draft transport strategy sets out priorities to ensure they can travel safely. My strategy includes a commitment to inclusive design, ensuring stations, vehicles and streets meet the needs of everyone. It also sets out plans to improve staff training and customer information, which are as important as infrastructure design. Since I became Mayor, we're recruiting 650 new station staff, and TfL is now training staff in how to assist customers with accessibility requirements, including people with invisible impairments. A trained Dementia Friends champion is now delivering information sessions to staff across the organisation. TfL provide clear and precise customer information to enable people with conditions like dementia to plan their journeys. This helps them and their loved ones feel safe and assured while travelling. TfL is also reviewing signage at stations to ensure it's accessible and intuitive. In July this year, TfL officially launched the Please Offer Me a Seat badge, which is helping many customers with invisible impairments, including those living with dementia, use the transport network. And as part of my commitment to London becoming the world's first dementia-friendly capital city, My health advisor, Dr. Tom Coffey, is working closely with the Alzheimer's Society to get City Hall staff trained as dementia friends.
Thank you very much indeed for that answer, Mr. Mayor. Can I push my luck a bit, and could I ask you to agree to a meeting with myself and the Alzheimer's Society to discuss the challenges that people with memory loss face when travelling around London, and how TfL can go further to help make their journeys easier and safer?
Yes, and I can also suggest that Dr. Tom Coffey comes with me to that meeting, and anybody else that we think may help, because we're in the ideas business here, because we want to be beacons on being the world's first dementia-friendly city. So any ideas gratefully received, particularly from those who...
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, let's go then to the next question. Is in the name of Assembly Member Dismore, demands on the Met requiring redeployment of officers.
Assemblymember Dismore, you are quite right to point out the unprecedented demand placed on the Met, and I thank you for recognising this. I cannot stress enough just how challenging the current situation is and how important it is that the government is made fully aware of the budgetary impact. As I've said out before, the Met is facing a unique challenge of greatly reduced resourcing at a time of increasing demand. The changing nature of crime, the shift in the threat of terrorism, the impacts of large and complex investigations such as Grenfell Tower, and the rise in pernicious crimes like sexual violence, domestic abuse, acid attacks and moped crime. Set against this challenge is years of systematic budgetary cuts from the government. Since 2012, the Met has made over £600 million in savings, and yet it's now got to make a further £400 million by 2021. Although I welcome the additional 1% pay rise for police officers this year, without funding attached, it merely represents an additional cost which will lead to pressure elsewhere. And let me be clear, my first priority is to keep Londoners safe, and I've done all I can to mitigate the impact of these cuts, increasing the police and council tax precept by the full 1.99%. Now the government must do its bit. It's important to be honest and upfront with Londoners. The Met's funding has been cut in real terms year on year since 2012. London's population has continued to rise, and the Met's funding per head has fallen by 20% in the last 5 years, the highest of any police force in the country. And the scale of this police funding crisis has already led to the loss of almost 3,000 police community support officers, most of the capital's police station front counters, and 120 police buildings in order to protect frontline police officers. Officer numbers will fall and are now at risk of dipping below 30,000 for the first time since 2003, just as they needed the most.
Well, thank you for your comprehensive answer. As you say, the Met's currently facing this huge demand due to the Grenfell Tower investigation, the 6 thwarted terrorist attacks, the 4 terrorist attacks that went through between March and September this year, the rise in crime, the 999 calls, and a number of other specialist investigations. There have been suggestions from some quarters that you should reconsider your target to have 32,000 officers in the Met in the light of this dire funding shortage the Conservative government is inflicting on the Met. Already we've seen a fall of 941 officers since last year to just over 30,000, while overall crime's up 5.6%. Is a further cut in numbers something that you are actively considering? What would the impact be on the Met's ability to respond with even fewer officers to these unprecedented multiple pressures, whilst also trying to keep London safe and the service operating in the boroughs?
I think you've articulated in your first question and your current one an understanding of some of the challenges we face as a global city. Just to give you a compare and contrast, I met the New York Commissioner of Police this week. Population of 8.6 million in New York, we have 8.8 million. They have 36,000 plus officers. We have just over 30,000, as you alluded to. What I'm saying to the government is unless they guarantee additional funding, do a U-turn on the cuts they're planning, we will go below 30,000 probably in the course of the next 12 months. Because when it comes to recruitment, we've got to recruit months and months in advance. If it's the case, I've got no certainty of funding going forward, because police officers, as you know, can't be made redundant. We can't fire them, for very good reasons, by the way. We've got to plan about not recruiting additional police officers. And you raised the issue about the strategic target of 32,000 officers. If it's the case for the foreseeable future, we're not going to have a change of heart from the government. Question, what is the point of having a target that will never be met?
Well, I think that's an important point. And when officers are switched to these specialist investigations, they're not new officers, but officers from other teams are being redeployed and they've been asked to do longer shifts and to cancel rest days. We know that the Met's been extending 8-hour shifts to 12 hours to deal with increased demand, and some officers who recently left have said that 12 hours are routinely being stretched to 16 hours. Do you think it's fair to ask officers to do these challenging hours? And do you think the government actually understand the scale of the problem their lack of funding for the police is causing?
Can I say, I would have hoped, genuinely, that a Prime Minister who was a former Home Secretary would get it, because spending so much time with police officers. Chief Superintendent Gavin Thomas, who is the President of the Police Superintendent Association, he said recently, "I suggest we have a perfect storm developing, comprised of fewer resources, reduced public services, new threats, and a worrying increase in some types of traditional crime. If the model for delivering policing services in the future is fewer people working longer, each doing ever more, then I suggest that model is fundamentally flawed." I agree with him.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We now have a question from Assembly Member Russell, toxicity charge.
Can I thank you for your continued support on this really important issue? As I'm sure members will be aware, last week I published new data on PM 2.5 exposure in London. These are tiny toxic air particles so small they can be ingested deep into the lungs, causing respiratory and cardiovascular diseases as well as cancer. The data reveals that every resident of London are living in areas which break these guidelines. Thousands of people die prematurely in our city every year as a direct consequence of poor air. In addition to reduced life expectancy, air pollution has also been linked to asthma, strokes, heart disease and dementia. As you've alluded, this month I'll be introducing the T-Charge, a £10 levy on the oldest pollution vehicles entering central London. This is due to start on the 23rd of October and will be the toughest emission standard enforced by any major city. It's a significant step towards implementing an ultra-low emission zone with even tougher standards. And I'm delighted to report, Chair, that these measures are already having a positive impact on our air quality, even ahead of the launch of the T-Charge. Since April, around 96,000 people have used TfL's new online vehicle checker to find out if their vehicle will be affected by the T-Charge. TfL now estimate that only around 6,000 non-compliant vehicles enter the centre of the city on an average weekday. When I announced the T-Charge, the estimate was 10,000 non-compliant vehicles. Over the last year, the number of non-compliant vehicles has therefore fallen. We expect this to reduce further as the T-Charge goes live. We've also seen a significant fall in the UK sales of diesel vehicles. Diesel sales fell 21% in August, dropping the fuel's share below 40%. Auto News attributed this partially to the T-Charge. Our policies are working. They will make London's air cleaner and they'll help to improve the health of Londoners. But I can't solve the problem as quickly as I'd like. London needs the government's help, most importantly, by reducing the financial impact on London's poorest communities, and that's why I'm lobbying for a diesel scrappage fund, and I raised this with the Prime Minister when I met her earlier this week.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. We both want Londoners to be able to trust the air they breathe, and Londoners keep telling us all that they want clean air. It's really good that you're seeing pre-compliance, and in terms of complying with the T-Charge, it's a small step, but it is that first important step on the way to getting the really tough regulation and having proper clean air. So thank you for that update. I want to raise an issue. I had a group of children come and visit me here at City Hall a couple of weeks ago from Bessemer Grange Primary School in Herne Hill. They're actually watching on the live stream right now. And Shiloh, Imogen, Oliver and Mark asked me to ask you to help them to cut pollution on their journey to school. They are very worried about delays to Quiet Way 7 in the West Norwood area. So my question is, will you or your Walking and Cycling Commissioner help to mediate between the Borough, Transport for London and local people to get Quiet Way 7 completed so Bessemer Grange children can help you clean up London's air by scooting, walking and cycling to school in safety?
Well, can I say hello to Shiloh, Imogen and Mark and all the pupils watching at Bessemer Grange Primary School. Actually, the idea of politicians getting ordinary residents of London to have their questions asked is a cracking idea. I might suggest that to the leader of my party to do Prime Minister's questions. Look, the good news to those pupils, Caroline, and thanks for raising this very important issue, is that my Walking and Cycling Commissioner, Dr Will Norman, and Transport for London had a very positive meeting with Councillor Braithwaite, the Cabinet Member for the London Borough of Lambeth, on the 22nd of September. And following that meeting, Councillor Braithwaite has confirmed support for design proposals on Quietway 7 in the West Norwood area. These will soon be published on the Lambeth website for public comment. Following this, Lambeth will need to grant final scheme approval later this year for construction to begin in 2018, and we'll continue to work with TfL, with Lambeth, with Assemblymember Eshalomi, and with anybody else who wants to make sure this is a successful scheme. But thank you, Charlotte, Imogen and Mark, for raising this with Caroline Russell.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'm sure the children will be really, really excited about this. And
when you can vote, when you're old enough, please vote for me.
Or the person who raised their question, Mr Mayor. Finally, you recently announced 50 air quality audits for primary schools in pollution hotspots. These audits are incredibly welcome, but there's another 350 schools on the list of the worst polluted places in London. Will you provide additional funding for these remaining schools to have audits in the next financial year? So,
good question. So we started with the 50 to pilot them and see how successful they were going to be. We can't do it by ourselves. There's got to be local boroughs working with the schools, working with the parents and the local community. And so they're doing that. If it's successful, we'll try and encourage other boroughs to use them with their schools as well. But just to be clear, we can't impose on schools and councils what to do here. Often they're not TfL roads. We've got no locus. What we can do is working with councils and schools. I visited a very good school in Islington with Councillor Claudia Webb. And a good example there of the school working with the council and the councillors to get improvements around there. And I'm willing to work with councils and schools to improve the air quality around their schools.
That's great. They will want a bit of money as well because the boroughs are all really cash-strapped, but I'm out of time.
Okay, Assemblymember Russell, thank you for that. Let's now go to Assemblymember Twycross's question on universal credit.
Thank you, Chair.
So sorry, no. Assemblymember Cooper, you had a similar question. Do you have a follow-up?
No, I don't have a similar question because Assemblymember Russell has just been talking about some completely different things. I'd like to come back to the topic of the T-charge, the emission surcharge, which her question sort of was about in the first place. And I'd like to actually ask the Mayor about the specifics to do with implementation. I know you've been very committed to trying to get the government to step up with the Clean Air Act and diesel scrappage, but obviously people are now, we're just a few days away now from the launch, and I wondered if you could tell us about how well we are now prepared for everything going live on the 23rd. What will it actually mean for Londoners when it goes live?
Sure. I'm distracted by that gorgeous boy next to you, and so I'll try not to be distracted and answer your question. It's been. I don't mean you, Unmesh. I don't mean you.
Well, this one.
Really disappointing. Can I just say? I mean, we've tried to learn the lessons from the C charge back in 2003. One of the things that Ken Livingstone as Mayor did really well was the planning to get the implementation right, and Nikki was, I know, around then, and it's really important to get these things right. And the amount of work taking place in advance of October 23rd is phenomenal. And I want to pay tribute to Transport for London, my Deputy Mayor Fal Shawcross, because we've got to get it right. As I said, the good news is we've actually seen a change in behaviour already. So those who are against this, and they sit on that part of the Assembly, have got to explain to Londoners why they're against this when we've already seen 4,000 fewer non-compliant cars coming into central London, which means air quality already improving. And the key thing is this, Leonie, if we get this right, it gives me confidence to roll out the ultra-low emission zone. The T-charge we think is relatively easy because we're using vehicles that are Euro 4. I've said to the DFT, if you give us some data from DVLC, I'll make it more easy. We're having problems with them showing us this data. We still think we'll get it right. There may be one or two teething problems, but fingers crossed. The real challenge is going to be the ultra-low emission zone. No one's tried that before on this scale. And by the way, I say this, colleagues often say to me, and those who are NGOs and campaigners, genuinely trying to challenge me, oh, this community around the world is doing this, or this city is doing this. They're nothing near the scale of what we're trying here in London. Our population is massive. The C-charge area is massive, and so to get this right is a difficult task. I'm confident we're going to get it right, and if we do get it right, it's thanks to the hard work of Val and the team at TfL.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Mayor, and I completely agree. We're way ahead of cities around the world, people talking about a diesel ban in 2025, and here we are literally days away from actually launching the T-charge. I wonder if I can just tease out a little bit more some questions that have come up from Londoners to do with things like, is there going to be some sort of soft landing period so that people will get an initial warning, because this is a big change. What are the arrangements? Will people be aware if they've got a blue badge? Is there something specific they need to do, or is that already taken care of?
So we've done a lot of work with the blue badge community and residents in the area for obvious reasons. And I think, you know, when people like Auto Trader, Auto News, when people like elsewhere in the car manufacturing industry are already seeing behavioural change, that gives me confidence that we've advertised this well enough. Soft landing is usually recommended if you've not done enough pre-publicity. We're doing a huge amount before October 23rd, even between now and then. Anybody who uses the tube will see some of the advertising we're doing there. We're also doing big advertising across the advertising boards across London. I'm confident there will be very, very, very few people who will complain after the 23rd of October we didn't know about this. But the key thing is to make sure in advance of that we make sure they know about it and take steps to ameliorate some of the things that will affect them because of the T-charge being live 23rd of October.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that going live, just as I was very pleased to see the last of the low-emission buses coming on to Putney High Street. So it's a legend in its own, rather dirty lunchtime. I wondered, actually, can you just give us an update on the impact that we've seen so far since March, when the last of the clean buses came on?
I mean, can I just say on this point, this is a really good example of you know, us in City Hall being able to improve the quality of life of Londoners almost straight away. So you'll remember in that part of London, in Putney High Street, on I think 750 times in 2016, 600 times in 2015, the NOx levels, the nitrogen dioxide levels, exceeding what the EU recommends on an hourly basis. Since we've started the low emission bus zone, the good news is it's gone from 750 times in the 6-month period to 6 times. And that shows a difference we can make. That's why I'm so surprised the Tories are against this. I understand why they're against some of our plans to clean up the area in London, but thank you for your support. And the good news is, particularly bearing in mind who's next door to you, the next bus zone is going to Brixton later on this year, and so residents in Brixton will hopefully see they're improving because of a change of policy from City Hall coming about, because we think air quality is an issue that needs to be addressed.
Well, 750 to 6 really speaks for itself. Thank you very much, Mr Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Twycross, Universal Credit.
Thank you, Chair. Universal Credit has the potential to improve and simplify work incentives, but this potential is being squandered. The rollout of Universal Credit is now throwing up a number of administrative shortcomings that are causing genuine hardship for claimants, especially when combined with the effects of other welfare reforms such as the benefit cap and the freeze in housing benefit rates for private renters. We know that Universal Credit claimants must wait 6 weeks and sometimes even longer to receive their first payment after making a claim. This can push people into extreme poverty, drive up rent arrears, put households at risk of homelessness, and leave claimants relying on food banks to feed themselves and their children. And by having a default process of making payments directly to claimants, Universal Credit is having a damaging effect on landlords' willingness to let properties to benefit claimants. The Work and Pensions Committee has received evidence that the first 3 London boroughs to have Universal Credit rolled out in their areas have already amassed £8 million in rent arrears, and that more than 2,500 London tenants claim Universal Credit are so far behind with their rent they're at risk of eviction. There are particular problems around claimants in short-term accommodation such as hostels, refuges and B&Bs building up arrears that can make it harder for vulnerable people to get the support they need. The rollout of Universal Credit also carries dangers for working families. Around 40% of claimants are in work, and the new element of in-work conditionality within Universal Credit holds the potential for sanctions to be applied to those in low-paid employment. Frank Field, the chair of the Work and Pension Select Committee, has highlighted these, and I quote, fundamental flaws in the operation of Universal Credit, and has called for them to be resolved before it's rolled out more widely. Organisations such as the CAB have found that Universal Credit is failing their clients and pushing many into debt. Jeremy Corbyn raised his concerns at PMQs yesterday, and the PM's answers frankly showed just how out of touch she's become.
Thank you, and I thank you for raising the examples from the London boroughs where we've already seen what devastating effects these policies are going to have. And I think the government's completely missed the point in their response to criticism of the universal credit proposals, because the point is that a safety net should alleviate suffering, not increase it.
Exactly.
And that if you have pilots, the point is to learn from them. I've heard an instance that that a mother was unable to purchase a new school uniform for her child because of the wait to receive universal credit, leading her to take out a loan. And so there's so many more examples than the devastating cases around evictions and rent arrears, because the real danger is that debt, which is already at ridiculously high levels in London and causing huge suffering, will be a sort of unintended consequence of this process, and that the main beneficiaries from this system will be high interest lenders. What help or advice can you give Londoners who are facing real hardships as a result of the government ignoring the evidence about the flaws with the programme?
So thank you for your question, and thank you for raising this issue and your concern over the period I've been the Mayor, raising issues about poverty in London and how we alleviate that. My offices are actively exploring opportunities to work with boroughs and civil society organisations to ensure the effects of the shortcomings of this policy are fully evidenced and that the government policy responds to the picture on the ground. I'll continue to lobby the government. I intend to write, as a consequence of your question and looking at some of the briefing I received, to write to the Secretary of State to explain the concerns that we have as Londoners about the impact on our neighbours and our friends. It can't be right.
That's very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's formally welcome Malachi Eshalomi, who's here, who is the best behaved person here. He gets the badge today.
Chair, hold on a sec. I've been quite well behaved.
You know, he's the best behaved. He gets the badge today. And welcome Assembly Member Eshalomi back to the chamber. Can she have an answer, Mr. Mayor, on her question re food bank usage?
Thank you, Chair, and welcome back. The latest statistics from the Trussell Trust show that the issues relating to benefits are one of the biggest drivers of people using their food banks, an issue raised by Fiona in her last question. In 26% of cases, delays to receiving benefits, an issue particularly linked to the rollout of universal credit, are the primary reason for people being referred to a food bank. And in a further 17% of cases, it is changes to benefit awards that are the primary reason for referral. Analysis of Trussell Trust food bank use in areas where full universal credit is rolled out shows that usage is increasing by almost 17%, more than double the national average of 6.6%. The situation is even more serious when you consider that food insecurity is likely to be much higher than indicated by food bank use, as many people who may be eligible for support from food banks do not use their services due to the associated stigma. In a city as prosperous as London, it's not acceptable that people have to rely on food banks to feed themselves. Tomorrow, London Food Link will publish the 3rd annual edition of Beyond the Food Bank, which is a food poverty profile of London. I've supported development of that report, highlighting what London boroughs are doing, including on the London Living Wage, to help improve food security for the most vulnerable residents. And early next year, I'll publish the new London Food Strategy, which will include a focus on alleviating food poverty. I'm working hard to make London more affordable, so all Londoners can be confident they can feed themselves and their families by making public transport more affordable through my Hopper Fare and TfL fares freeze, which will help Londoners access jobs, education and training, and also my programme for delivering genuinely affordable homes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I've been spending a lot of time in our wonderful children's centres in Lambeth, and one of the courses they run is back to work for some of the mothers. And speaking to some of the staff there, they've noticed an increase in referrals that the children's centre do to food banks. And obviously in London we're seeing high cost in terms of a number of people who are accessing food banks are actually in work. Is there anything that you can do from your office in terms of how we can look at mitigating some of the impact of Londoners who've been dragged into poverty as a direct result of some of the changes from the government's policies?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. And one of the reasons why we're doing lots of work around, Rosie Boycott and Matthew Ryder doing work around the issue of alleviating food poverty with the new London food strategy is to see what we can do in City Hall without waiting for powers to be devolved by central government. So the London food strategy will be helpful. What we publish tomorrow will provide a good profile so we can micro-target the resources. You'll be aware of the answer I gave to Fiona Twycross in relation to writing to the Secretary of State. When I do so, I'll be pointing to the evidence we have in London in relation to the problems and challenges we have. The bad news is actually we've seen a reduction in the number of children's centres in London, and there are pockets of London where we need children's centres, we need affordable childcare, but we aren't getting that. And so it's compounding the insecurity and poverty Londoners are suffering. But one of the key things that Matthew Ryder is doing, working with other deputy mayors and myself, is what we can do to assist those Londoners who are currently struggling because of the consequences of the changes made by government, as well as other factors outside their control. Inflation being almost 3% when wages have been frozen or gone up by just 1%.
Mm. And you quoted some figures from Trust for London in terms of referrals to food banks. So at the Peak and Food Bank in Peckham, in my constituency in Southwark, there's been a massive 33% increase of referrals from April to July this year. And 94% of those referrals are a direct result of changes to benefits. I think sometimes it's a case of a range of people see food banks in London as something that isn't an issue. And when you've got politicians saying it's that, you know, like high-profile politicians saying food banks are uplifting, what message do you want to send out to politicians and people working in this sector to say, actually, this is a real issue in London for a number of people?
Well, I think it shows that there's not just the current leader of the Tory party, but the future leader is also out of touch. I think what's clear to me is it should be a source of shame for one of the richest cities in the world to have friends, neighbours and family members who've got to rely upon the charity of family and friends or a food bank. In some parts of London, we have Michelin-star restaurants and food banks, and as somebody who's visited my local food banks on a regular basis over the last few years, as I know Leonie Cooper has as well, it's heartbreaking to see people's dignity affected this way. It's heartbreaking to see the stigma attached to it. We've got to reduce the stigma. Yeah. We've got to give people the confidence to come forward and ask for help. But also we need to find more ways to signpost people to the help, you know. And some of the churches, by the way, in the faith communities do a remarkable amount of good in London. There's nothing uplifting about seeing poverty in London or there being a need for food banks.
And I know, just quickly, and I know obviously there is a lot of data that we have here at City Hall, but is there any scope for looking at some more assessment and data on the real impact of welfare policy since 2010? Because I feel that sometimes, you know, we're not capturing everything. There are still a lot of people in London, especially, you know, people in some of those more deprived parts of London, who aren't even on the radar of any of a number of organisations who are living day in, day out in severe poverty.
One of the things that we need to recognise is, as bad as the figures are, they don't give us a true scale of how bad things are in London for the reasons you've said. Because many people will be because of the stigma, will be too unwilling to go to a food bank and don't want to be referred by the relevant referrer to a food bank and rely upon friends and family, or skip a meal. We've seen, in the work Rosie Boycott and Matthew Ryder have done, we've seen during holidays children going hungry because there aren't the facilities available. That's why we've done what we've done with the Mayor's Fund in relation to the Kitchen Social Programme. But, you know, I think we all have a role to play.
Thank you.
Okay. Next question is from Assembly Member Copley, space standards.
Thank you. I believe having minimum housing space standards is a vital element of delivering good growth. All new homes should be fit for purpose now and into the future, with enough space to ensure they can be flexibly used by a range of residents. As I made clear in my draft housing strategy, significantly more homes must be delivered to meet Londoners' housing needs. This will require higher density development, and housing space standards will be crucial to ensuring the quality of this housing. In my new London plan, I'll strengthen the policy on housing standards to set out how all self-contained housing should meet minimum space standards. Not having enough living space can have a negative impact on people's quality of life emotionally and physically, and can impact on children's social and emotional development. As well as the health and well-being benefits of living in a home with enough space, minimum space standards provide many other advantages. Homes with enough space are easy to adapt to changing needs and lifestyles and to future living styles and habits. Space standards can also help stabilise the housing market by providing certainty to developers. The standards mean that they know what floor space will be needed and how many homes they can fit on a site, and can factor this into the price they're prepared to pay for the land. I believe all people really want is to be able to afford a decent and secure place to live, which is what I'm committed to delivering.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Mayor. I want to ask you specifically about build-to-rent properties. Your affordability and viability SPG allows for flexibility of design for build-to-rent homes. Now, recently, some property developers have been proposing micro homes, some as small as 19 metres squared. Now, that's just a little bigger than 2 prison cells and about the same size as a student flat. Is that good enough for London?
No. By the way, as I often do, I saw your tweets in relation to your visit that you made, Tom. Can I just reassure you in this? Look, of course, there'll be some applications that come to me in my quasi-judicial role. Some won't, and that's I think what your concern is, that those that don't come to me can be these micro homes. Can I be clear now that my plan will not include any explicit flexibility to support micro homes, and give you that reassurance, because obviously your concern is lower down the food chain. I say that in a pejorative way, but council will give permission because of flexibility. I'm quite clear, for the reasons I've said, why these aren't good for the sustainability of future Londoners.
Well, that's good to hear. And any scheme that did come across your desk because it met the threshold, would you reject an application on the basis of flats that came in at that size?
Yeah, that's why I was quite clear to refer to my quasi-judicial role. So I'm not going to prejudge
an application. Yes, I understand that.
But it's really important to telegraph to developers. What I don't want is developers in the future to say, hold on a sec, the only way we can make this scheme viable is by building micro homes. Well, I've made clear now my expectations in relation to space standards. So don't come complaining about them not being viable if they're not micro homes.
Thank you for that. Now, the developer in question that has been proposing these particular micro homes is claiming that they're going to be let out at London Living Rent. Now, of course, it's easier for a developer to say they'll offer a lower rent if they slash the size of the property. The London Living Rent is a policy that, a very welcome policy that is very much associated with yourself because it's your scheme. Would you be concerned about developers putting that label onto micro homes?
Well, to be fair, I mean, you played a big role in us getting there in relation to lobbying me to get a London Living Rent. Look, a London Living Rent home shouldn't be substandard. And I think what developers are in danger of misreading is, what we believe in about having homes that are affordable to rent for Londoners, with them being somehow, substandard. No. The expectation from us is to reduce the cost of renting in London, but to maintain good quality standards, including sufficient space.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Before I take the next 2 questions, will the Assembly agree to suspend in Standing Orders 2.9b in accordance with the provision of Standing Orders 1.1h in order to allow the remaining business on the agenda to be completed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Gavron. Oh, of course you did. So sorry. And apologies, Assembly Member Boss. Yes.
Mr. Mayor, you've frequently referred to the unprecedented £3 billion affordable housing funding provided to you by the government. The government's now rightly raising concerns about this, how this is being spent, as so far this year you've only built 371 affordable, or started only 371 affordable homes. What are you going to do to reverse this failure, to use the generous funding that has been provided by the government?
Well, no concerns have been raised with me, but let me be clear. The time it takes to give permission after you've allocated the money and for construction to begin takes years. And I've made the point that actually because of the pipeline being so low, only 13% affordable in the year before I became mayor, it will take some time for London to see progress. The commitment I made to the government was by 2021, 90,000 starts. We're on course to deliver those.
In your manifesto, Mr. Mayor, you promised an increase in housing every year. Was last year not a year?
Well, the cupboard was bare when I became the mayor. Only
Every
13%
year,
in the
Mr. Mayor,
pipeline.
you promised to increase homes, and last year you built 25% less than your predecessor.
Space standards.
25% less homes with the correct space standards than your predecessor. 25% less.
Right, so just to be clear, Chair, I think Assemblyman Boff is giving me credit for there being fewer substandard space homes in London than there were before, and I accept that credit.
25% less, Mr. Mayor, and yet you promised to build more. Open up to Londoners and tell them why you misled them in your manifesto.
Chair, as I said to the Prime Minister earlier
The
this week...
Conservative Party are out of time,
Sure.
so let me move on to the next question.
Oh, that's a shame, Chair.
The next question is in the name of Assembly Member Gavron, and it's about the London Heritage Strategy.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this excellent question. London's heritage and historic environment are irreplaceable and an essential part of what makes London that vibrant, successful and unique city it is. My new draft London plan will ensure that the city's heritage is protected and conserved. Heritage and conservation is not only about listed buildings and conservation areas, but about an approach that prioritises understanding the context of a place and its local community, being sensitive to what is unique about an area, and using this to inform its future development and evolution. As new developments are designed, the things that Londoners value about a place should be used positively to guide and stimulate growth and create distinctive, attractive places that people care about. These principles guide my regeneration funds, including the Good Growth Fund, which has 3 overarching aims of supporting people, place and prosperity, and promotes community-led regeneration. As you'll be aware, there was a UNESCO World Heritage Committee reactive monitoring mission to Westminster World Heritage Site this February. I met with the mission officials and set out my strong commitment to conservation and the management of London's World Heritage Sites and London's heritage in general. Following this mission, the World Heritage Committee decided not to place Westminster World Heritage Site on the World Heritage in Danger List and made a number of recommendations which I'm addressing. This includes clearer and stronger policies in the New London Plan to protect London's World Heritage Sites. I've also recruited a Culture at Risk officer to track cultural places and spaces that are at a risk of closure or loss, many of which are part of London's heritage. As a result of this, and my team's close working with Historic England, the Kasowski murals on Old Kent Road were given a Grade 2 listing in July this year. I'll continue to work with Historic England and the Heritage Lottery Fund to embed heritage across my cultural programme. I've appointed Stuart Hobley, head of the Heritage Lottery Board, as a cultural ambassador. Stuart will help champion and advocate for heritage through my culture strategy and my cultural infrastructure plan. Heritage will also be a part of projects such as the London Borough of Culture, which will celebrate local heritage. And looking forward, my design advocates and the newly established London Review panel will provide greater support to the GLA in assessing the quality of works affecting London's heritage assets.
Thank you. That's packed with new information. Thank you very much for that. And it's very clear that you really do understand what heritage means to London, Londoners, and to you. I think all over London there are thousands of local landmarks, and they root us, and they're part of our stories. Look at you could take the Henry Prince Estate, part of your story, or we could, and whether we're looking at those, or whether we're looking at big iconic assets like the Tidal Thames and Tower Bridge, they're really important to us. But we're at a time, and you recognise that, of growth, big churn, big change, and we need very, very strong heritage championship. Now, the current London plan doesn't give that. It doesn't have heritage as part of its strategic objective or vision. It has very weak policies, and they're weaker than the National Planning Policy Framework. Now, my question is, we can't, and you understand that, we can't let heritage fall by the wayside in the name of growth. And how will your new London plan really strengthen it? Will you take on board some of those points I've made about it being part of the vision and the objectives, and also strengthening the actual policies?
Absolutely, and just to compound your...
With a very succinct answer, please.
So, I talk about good growth.
One more question.
I talk about good growth for a reason. I want good growth. But secondly, I mean, there's a great Churchill saying, which is, we shape buildings and buildings shape us. I think it applies to heritage as well.
Well, okay, that's a very good answer. Thank you very much. The second thing is that we have weak policies have led to weak implementation. And I was astounded to find that we really have very, very inadequate monitoring, both of London plan decisions and of local decisions. There's only one key performance indicator, which just looks at the heritage assets that are at risk, and that's about extreme risk. That's about 5%. And what we really need now, I think, are two things, and I really hope that you will consider these. One, to get better implementation, is that your London plan policies, your new ones, which will be greatly strengthened from what you say, are then followed up by a heritage strategy to help boroughs and stakeholders really understand those policies and implement them properly. And secondly, that we have another performance indicator which looks at the impact of planning decisions on the local historic fabric.
Look, can I just...
Is this a consideration?
No, listen, always willing to listen to ideas from you, Nikki. I mean, so one of the things that not helped is, for example, permitted development. We're losing some great quality buildings, lovely heritage because of PD. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm helping councils apply for opt-outs that they can receive in relation to PD. One of the things we're trying to do is with the Mayor's Design Advocates is cascade down the expertise to boroughs when it comes to design reviews to respect heritage. And public practice, which is an idea about experts going in to help local authorities is to build up their expertise. We can't do it with the best will in the world from City Hall. We've got to build up the expertise of the 32, 33 boroughs across London. We're willing to do that. And we've got to make councils understand why it's important. Growth per se is not bad. I think you can have growth, but it should be good growth. And that's why heritage and what you're talking about is very important. I'll think about your point about KPI in relation to implementation, and I'll speak to Jules Pipe, the Deputy Mayor in charge of this area, to see what we can do. But listen, this is very important for us. It's who we are.
Thank you, and the heritage strategy, please.
Okay, yeah, definitely.
Thank you.
Next question is in the name of Assembly Member Shaw, and it's the Mayor's Design Advocates.
Thank you, Chair. I was delighted to welcome my design advocates to City Hall last month and to kick off their important role in helping me to deliver good growth by informing my policies, investments and decisions in the built environment. My design advocates are a pool of world-class built environment experts. They represent both the public and private sector and include practitioners, academics, policymakers and community activists. There are more female design advocates than male, and a quarter are from Black, Asian and ethnic minority backgrounds. They'll be supporting me to deliver my Good Growth by Design programme, which is my plan to improve quality in the built environment and recognise the role of good design in achieving good growth. The design advocates will be supporting me in three capacities. First, they'll be acting as critics, providing greater scrutiny of the design quality of development. They will form the core of my newly established London Review panel. They'll also be signing up to and promoting my London Quality Review Charter, which promotes the consistency and quality of design review across the many local review panels in London. Secondly, they'll be acting as researchers informing design-related policy by undertaking research inquiries. For example, they'll be helping to refresh London housing design guidance in light of the need for density development and the challenges that this poses to quality of space, the needs of families, accessibility and the impact on the surrounding environment. They'll be helping me to develop my plan to make London the world's first national park city and developing projects for an even greener city. They'll be developing the Public London Charter to ensure quality, accessible public spaces, maximising public access and minimising the rules governing new spaces as set out in my London plan. And thirdly, my design advocates will be acting as true advocates. They'll be celebrating examples of good growth and promoting the sector, whilst also supporting a greater diversity amongst its members.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You have anticipated a couple of my supplementary questions, but on the first one which you mentioned, which is the early work on design review charter, can you tell us how far advanced this work is, and would you also be able to let us have the terms of reference for the design review charter, please?
So the review is at a very early stage. Very happy to give you the terms of reference. Also very happy in having for Jules Pipe, who's in charge of this area, to meet with you and others who have an interest in this area to give you an idea of the various reviews they're undertaking, not just on the housing design guidance, the charter you refer to, but other works. The prefabrication that Nicky Gavin raised at the last Mayor's Question Time, really important area. But they're looking at a whole host of issues. I'm really happy for Jules Pipe and the team to sit down with you to discuss this.
That's very helpful. One aspect which you haven't mentioned, and I'm very keen to explore, and that is about equality in design. I believe that London, both in terms of in terms of inequality, in terms of design and construction sectors, doesn't actually fare very well at all. So are your design advocates being tasked to tackle those inequalities, and how will they be doing this?
One of the exciting things, I think, in relation to inequalities in the construction sector is the modern methods of construction and prefabrication. And Nicky Gavin raised it at last Mayor's Question Time. The Homes for Londoners board had a presentation from Peter John, who's the lead in London councils, and I think the Mayor's Design Advocates can play an important role here in relation to addressing this area. It's an important area, and actually, particularly bear in mind Brexit and the consequences of people leaving, the skill sets leaving, we need to address this. So that's one of the things that the MDAs will be looking into as well.
Well, Mr. Mayor, there are major challenges that I hope the advocates will address it, because when you look at the figures, which are pretty stark, only 14.1% of construction workforce in the UK is female, 11.3% BAME, and less than 5% with declared disability. Surely we can do much, much better than this, and I hope that this is taken as one of the priorities by your design advocates to get the right balance.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
That's the end of the Q&A session. Can I say thank you, Mayor, for your answers today? Thank you. Part B, can I ask the Assembly to agree the motion which is set out on the agenda in my name, which is that the Assembly notes the answers to the questions asked? Agreed? Thank you very much. Item 6, can I ask the Assembly to agree the recommendations as set out in the report? Agreed? Agreed. Thank you. Can I ask the Assembly to agree the recommendations set out in the report regarding actions taken by myself under delegated authority? Agreed? Agreed. Item 8, the date of next meeting. The next scheduled meeting of the London Assembly will be the plenary meeting, which will take place at 10 a.m. on Thursday, 2nd of November. The meeting will principally be used to hold a question and answer session with the Chair and Chief Executive of the London Legacy Development Corporation. Thank you very much. Item 9, any other business. Just to say thank you to Rebecca Arnold for her support and guidance here today on her first appearance in her new role as Head of Committee and Members' Services. Yes, absolutely. Without a Head of Committee and Members' Services, a chair couldn't operate. That's it. There will be a lunchtime briefing for members on the fabulous Museum of London. It's in Committee Room 1 at 1 o'clock. Thank you, members.
GLA Chamber Sound.